Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring the wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey stuff. Volume 2. Or Darwin, if you prefer, by Mel Hunter. The Planet That Time Forgot, by Donald A. Wollheim. Date of publication 2083 AD, by William Morrison. Finders Keepers, by Milton Lesser. The Incredible Slingshot Bombs, by Robert Moore Williams. Or Darwin, if you prefer, by Mel Hunter. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, September 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Mr. Harbinger was tired of his job. In fact, he was so tired of it he put down his pencil in the middle of a series of chemical notations. All noted, he realized with sudden clarity, in a disgustingly neat and orderly fashion. "Mr. Cushman, sir," he said quietly to the small, prissy man at the desk near the wall. "Why don't you take these titrations and jam them straight up the middle of you-know-where?" And with that previously inconceivable remark, Mr. Harbinger put on his hat, removed his spotless, starched smock, and passed through the doors of the Cushman Chemical Company, Incorporated, for the last time, and decidedly the most satisfactory time. Upon arriving home to his ridiculously, he suddenly noted with even greater clarity than before, orderly, proper, drab room, Mr. Harbinger sighed. He removed his hat, pocketed his glasses, and sank in bleak defeat into the sole uncomfortable easy-chair which graced his room. There was another of those momentarily crystal-clear glimpses. "I've traded my last tie," he said aloud with the depths of the sticks in his colourless voice. Closing his mind as best he could to this very disconcerting habit that had acquired him, Mr. Harbinger continued to sit there, looking at the dingy wall he had examined minutely now, every evening, for the past 13 years. "I would appreciate it if that wall would just go away," he thought, knowing that it wouldn't, and that he was probably condemned to stare at it, or one worse than it, every evening for the rest of his life. It was while he was contemplating a particularly uninteresting spot in the fading design of the wallpaper, which was intended to decorate his room, that he noticed it wasn't a spot at all, but an eye. Of all things! Reacting in exactly the same manner as he would when confronted with a line in a newspaper ad which defied his watery vision, he plucked his pince-nez from a vest pocket and placed them in their accustomed notch upon the bridge of his nose. "Go away," he said to it, when he had assured himself that it was most decidedly an eye. "Why," returned a mouth, suddenly materializing out of the design below both eyes, the second of which had resolved itself in time to wink at him in a most disconcerting manner, almost rudely, one might say. "Because," Mr. Harbinger faltered, at a loss as to how best to converse with a disembodied mouth and a pair of floating eyes, which could not even remain on line with each other, but kept drifting about over a small area of the wall, bumping together now and again. "In a moment you'll commit a non sequitur like, 'Oh, yeah?' and I will scream," the mouth promised. Mr. Harbinger, after a moment's pause in which he frantically tried to swallow those very words, somehow risen to his lips for the first time in his life, grasped at a straw. "Would a drink help make it go away?" he quavered. He was now beginning to feel that his mind was running down, and since he had never had a drink in his life, he possessed the abstainer's conception of alcohol as an instantaneous neural bombshell. "A drink for which one of us?" was a reply, and it sent him off in a whole new wilderness of speculation. "Which one of the three of you needs one?" he gulped, completely bemused. "Three of who?" the mouth asked, in some consternation. Almost, Mr. Harbinger thought, in a trace of fright quickly concealed. "Oh, you mean those two eyes?" it said, laughing in obvious relief. "I'm sorry if their moving about that way upsets you, but I seem to have a bit of trouble with my control." The tone became somewhat rueful. "The mechanisms are not in very good condition these days." "Listen," exclaimed Mr. Harbinger. "If I'm going to have hallucinations, I insist that they be of an ordinary garden variety, not cluttered with such feeble self-excuses as machinery being at fault." He was quite wrought up, and to be so shook him visibly, for he was accustomed to a most unruffled, detached manner of thought. "The fault lies not with machinery, or, as I might like to tell myself, with this modern technical age running away too fast for us poor day-by-day mortals to keep up with it." Mr. Harbinger took a deep breath, said, "That's not it at all. It's just that I have always had a romantic streak in me that is dying of malnutrition. I'm choked by the tedium, the huge, calibrated, double-titrated boredom of it all." He sat down limply, breathless, for this was a major oration for Mr. Harbinger to deliver all at once. "Hell," said the mouth, "me too." "What?" Mr. Harbinger faltered, becoming somewhat surer by the instant that such a remark was out of character for a deranged hallucination. It seemed to him, though he admittedly was ceasing to be a reliable judge of such matters, that the particular hallucination in question should be taking more the part of the strangling Don Juan in him, the drowning Errol Flynn, the departing Da Vinci. "I said, me too," the mouth declared again, pausing then to retract a wondering left eye, which had developed a fondness for a repetition of the pattern a foot or two down the wall. "Where I come from, there is nothing but boredom too," it went on, "all day, every day. I run test checks on various gadgets, finding flaws and lacking the materials to put them in proper order, even if I had the knowledge, and even if anybody cared whether I did or not." It pursed itself, as if remembering the pall of it all, and continued. "I had hoped to find a time when people were lively, when there was zip and a dash to just getting up in the morning, when somebody would care what you did every day. Oh, not that they don't care if I should miss a day," it quickly qualified. "They care very much about that. Laws, you know. But just that, and no more. Why, if I never succeeded in repairing a single machine my whole life long, no one would say a word. I only try out of boredom, and even then that gets dull after a few years." "I'm afraid I don't understand," Mr. Harbinger said, sitting back in his chair when he realized that it was silly to hang on the words of an hallucination from the depths of one's own mind. Really, he thought, one should already know every word it said. But then he puzzled again over the content of the mouth's words. "It's very simple," the mouth went on. "Should we really get a machine in absolutely perfect working order, it is immediately carted away to a warehouse and stored, all snug in an indestructible cocoon, so it will never wear out again, you know." It sighed. "Really doesn't pay to get interested, or try to be a perfectionist any more." Mr. Harbinger felt an unaccountable twinge of sympathy at the truly apathetic tone of the mouth, which appeared to droop a bit at the corners, as though it could never again think of a thing to smile at. The eyes drooped too, if such a thing can be conceived, though he had an extraordinary disinclination to look at them, being continually unnerved by the way they insisted on drifting about. "Cup of tea?" he asked nervously, offering this small irrelevancy as a means of changing the subject, which so clearly depressed his parturated companion. nor did the subtle development of his concept of the apparition on the wall escape his notice. He now seemed to be of two minds over the whole thing. Either he was succumbing to the reality of his hallucination, and his sketchy remembrance of college psych told him that meant he was either very sane or very insane. He couldn't recollect which. Either that, or he was having the scientific or parascientific adventure of the age. "Why, I'd love one," answered the mouth, the corners undrooping noticeably. "I had no idea you 20th centuryites were so civilized as all that. Tea! Imagine!" Mr. Harbinger fairly popped out of the chair, unstrung again at the reference, clearly made in deprecation, to his own century. However, he covered over admirably the mental abyss which yawned at his feet by clattering about among the few pieces of chipped china in his cupboard, as though his sanity depended on the amount of distracting noise he could wring from the simple act of setting out a tea service for two. And indeed, for the moment, it did. He accepted gratefully, to put it mildly, the few moments' respite accorded him by the small, secure humdrum of preparing the hot water, of fussing over just the minutely exact amount of tea leaves to be spooned into each cup. Once again, as he invariably did each time he prepared the beverage, he silently congratulated himself on his one small talent. But the dilute pleasure to be derived from such a trivia evaporated the instant he considered what would again confront him when he turned from the tiny Pullman kitchenette. He grew faint at the thought of being forced once more to brave the wondering, improbable eyes and the completely unthinkable mouth. A worse thought crossed his reeling mind as he started for the other side of the room, trying to walk the tea over with his eyes closed, but giving that up as impossible when he remembered the perilously threadbare condition of his rug. "Will I have to help you drink it?" The cups clattered betrayingly in each hand, no matter how mightily he strove to control his nerves. "Heavens, no!" laughed the mouth. One eye crinkled in apparent amusement, the other continued to contemplate what Mr. Harbinger referred to as the WC. A hand shot out of the wall and tapped Mr. Harbinger on the shoulder from the side of his weakest eye. At this completely unexpected assault, poor Mr. Harbinger gave a despairing little gasp, and would have dropped both cups smash on the floor had not a second hand materialized instantly and snatched them both, more or less expertly, in mid-air, spilling hardly a drop or two. "My," Mr. Harbinger mumbled weakly, sinking like a wilting leaf into his patently uneasy easy-chair. "I'm afraid the complications of this thing, be it lunacy or be it occult or whatever, are getting completely beyond me." He sat there, trembling and impotent, unable to do much of anything beyond refusing to observe the two bizarrely supported cups of steaming tea. At last the mouth said in some reproach, "If you will be good enough to take one of these off my hands—" "Oh, I say, off my hands! I'd very much like to have a bit of the other." The left hand seemed to extend itself toward Mr. Harbinger a bit, and though he could not help but cower down in his chair, unhinged as he was by all this, he at last realized that it would be only common courtesy to do what the mouth had asked. So realizing, he literally forced, his trembling hand to take the cup from the proffering impossibility, and retract slowly enough to avoid catapulting the chattering china across the room. As it was, there was a good deal of splashing before he managed to get it safe on the small table by the side of the chair. The mouth made a creditable job of the tea-sipping, considering the handicaps it was forced to operate under, the wondering eyes and all. And at length, after performing a most peculiar contortion in obvious reluctance to further prostrate its host by asking for a napkin, it voiced a thought which caught Mr. Harbinger's attention in spite of his badly shattered composure. "Doesn't it seem," it said musingly, almost to itself, "as though there ought to be some way we, that is to say you and I, as we exist in our own time, could right the wrongs of our respective situations?" It wasn't a question. More of a spoken dream thought, with all the drifting oddness of inflection that those occasionally voiced wisps of desire usually possess. The very familiarity of that unmistakable kind of shading, its very humanness convinced, in a second, Mr. Harbinger of the reality of the thing which was occurring in his room, as all the fantastic things which had gone before had failed to do more than terrify him beyond enduring. He became, in that instant, a believer. Accordingly, he said the, to him, proper thing. "I don't believe we've met." They talked, thereafter, for hours, long into the night, undisturbed by the passage of time, not distracted, at least not very badly distracted, by the recurrent pangs of the unsated supper appetite, exchanging small bits of unhappiness in their separate lots, and each sympathizing heartily and hopelessly with the misfortunes of the other, like two long-lost souls, as indeed they were. The upshot of it was that they resolved to meet again in the same manner when the conditions of their separate lives permitted, and to this end they set a series of future dates calculated to find the disembodied man, whose name turned out to be Jones, at liberty to manipulate the forbidden time mechanism of his age at an hour when his workshop was deserted, and when Harbinger might be expected to be at home after the day's job hunting, a prospect from which he shrank, or a day's work, if he should be fortunate enough to ever get another job. A possibility he doubted, due to the precipitate, not to say frank, or even to say vulgar, now that he thought of it, manner in which he had informed his previous employer of his decision to resign. But meet they did, from time to time, and they had many good laughs over the pun in that one. When it came to puns, Jones was pretty adept, and it was a puzzle to Mr. Harbinger how the language had changed so little in 150 years. Jones cleared that up by explaining that the status quo in everything from contraceptives to slang had been rigidly maintained and enforced for nearly all that time, beginning with a great scholars' debate in the UN in 1971. Eventually, a night came when Jones greeted Mr. Harbinger with startling news. "I don't know whether it had occurred to you," he said slowly, "but I could arrange, I think, for you to get a job up here in good old 2094, if you wanted me to." Jones said it slowly, for he had found that such novel ideas were apt to throw Mr. Harbinger into an attack of jingling nerves by virtue of their very novelty, a commodity he found a very hot thing to handle. "My word," Mr. Harbinger said at length. "What on earth would I do up there? And how about identification, and all that?" Now that he had somewhat assimilated the idea, details passed rapidly through his head, spinning as it was now with the mystery of the even suggested possibility of him, Henry Harbinger, taking a jaunt in time. Oh, the ideas, the details came, but for a few moments he was too carried away with the romance of it all to grasp at them, to do more than allow the gasping Juan, the sinking Flynn, the distant Da Vinci to reverse themselves for an instant and show small signs of inner life. The mouth at length interrupted, though with courtesy, this reverie which showed signs of going on and on. "Oh, the details are simple enough," it said. "I've already taken the liberty of producing several dozen sets of foolproof identity files which I can bribe a civil servant to slip into the master record section. You would be listed as a research chemist and given unlimited funds to experiment to your heart's content, and with no control exercised over the work you choose to do." "Unbelievable," Mr. Harbinger whispered, all the while wanting desperately to believe such a miraculous thing could somehow come to pass. The mouth smiled. The eyes crinkled. Then the mouth said, Pick a name. Smith, Ackerman, Evans, Doherty. All good solid names to fit your appearance. Mr. Harbinger rose to the delicately extended bait at last. I imagine, with a little chicanery, I could arrange for you to get into something here, too, if you would want to. He rose from his chair, fired and appalled at once by the notion of bringing a civil servant or some such romantic dastardy. Pacing the floor, he huffed and puffed to himself in contemplation of intrigue, looking for all the world like a small boy planning a daring raid on a neighbour's pear-tree. Social Security, he mumbled. Voters' registration. Income tax records. As he paced, the eyes wandered alarmingly over the surface of the wall, but he didn't notice, having long since become more or less accustomed to that small absurdity. At last he stopped dead, in possession of the solution, and relieved, though he would never admit it, least of all to himself, to see a way around the bribery and such things, romantic though they doubtless were. You can take mine, if you don't mind the name and all. My record is clean, never been arrested, except once for jaywalking 10 years or so ago. He paused to consider the ramifications of this infinitesimal aberration, but at length decided, with much humming and vacillation, that there was no chance of his fingerprints having been taken for that, and remembering that his state did not require them on a driver's license either. Finally they agreed to try it. There was a slight bit of trepidation on Jones's part, for he explained to Mr. Harbinger that it would be necessary to draw mightily on the power supply of the area surrounding his workshop, but that the exchange would be effected instantly by the time mechanism, as he always called it, and that, by the time anyone arrived at the workshop from Master Power to investigate, Mr. Harbinger, or Darwin, as it would be in his new life and time, he having taken great pleasure in the illustrious history of that appellation, and insisted on it, would be long gone in the streets and away, safe in his new identity. They shook hands on it, and a queer gesture it must have been. At last the appointed day arrived, then the appointed hour, and at long last the appointed minute and second. Jones had assured Mr. Harbinger, or Darwin, if you prefer, that he had taken extraordinary pains to make sure that time mechanism would be in perfect working order. But unfortunately, the devil-may-care attitude of the technicians over at Master Power was beyond his ability to rectify, indeed, had not occurred to him at all. As a regrettable consequence, at the instant he threw the switch, at the precise second the time mechanism seemed to swell itself for the momentous event it was about to initiate, a catnapping ne'er-do-well of a technician over at Master Power, a recognized incompetent among his fellows and a braggart to boot, shifted his up-propped feet from one instrument bank to another more comfortable, and in doing so tripped a switch with a careless toe, robbed the great time mechanism of the last ounce of energy necessary for the task it was attempting, and so stranded poor Mr. Harbinger, or Darwin, if you prefer, and poor Mr. Jones, in the constantly shifting anomalies and vicissitudes of variable time. Perhaps you have seen them occasionally for an instant, an eye peering at you in pitiable entreaty from under a leaf of a tree as you pass. Of course, when you look closely they, or whichever of them it was, poor Mr. Harbinger, or Darwin, if you prefer, or perhaps it was poor Mr. Jones, are gone on to other times and other crannies to peer out of for a moment. Perhaps you have heard a voice call out to you on some unlikely occasion, or in some improbable place. I remember once hearing a voice distinctly cry out, "You there!" But when I turned about, I could catch only a fleeting glimpse of a mouth and one eye as they vanished from the side of a nearby church steeple 30 feet or so in the air. I suppose it was only the merest chance that I happened to glance directly at that spot as I turned, or else I should never have known who it was who called. As it is, I still wonder whether it was poor Mr. Jones, or poor Mr. Harbinger, or Darwin, if you prefer. The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. The Planet That Time Forgot by Donald A. Wollheim. Originally published in Planet Stories, Fall, 1940. Narrated by Tom Trussel. She stood upon the high battlements of the palace overlooking the land of Tomb, with sunlight splashing over the beauty and radiance of her. She, Umith, Mattia of Tomb. Her eyes wandered to the road that wound, ribbon-like, far beyond her land, out into the great reaches of her world, out into Nimbor. Nimbor, whose lords even now were in session with Tomb's officials, demanding the land's surrender to their superior forces. Nimbor, whose rulers offered life to the heads of Tomb's commonwealth, providing the Mattia mate with their prince. She stood, trying to drink in the splendor of the land, for this might be a last time. What her answer would be as Directress of Internal Relations she well knew. What her answer as woman to Ald of Nimbor would be, she knew even better. But now she must return to the council meeting. Denuth, head centre of Tomb, was speaking as she re-entered. "What you demand, Ald of Nimbor, is the Commonwealth's freedom, and our officers, in return for petty sinecures under your proposed regime, and the Mattia in marriage, as if it were in the power of any save she to grant that." She did not flush as the insolent eyes of the young man across the table fell upon her, appraised, then leered approval at her. Her voice was clear and cold as she said, "You boast loudly of your war machine, Ald of Nimbor. You remark casually that you could crush our armies with a mere handful of men. But you say you are willing to spare our lives if we surrender without a struggle. In return for what do you offer us life, Prince of Nimbor? Serfdom and misery for our people under Nimbor's hand? The stigma of cowardice upon us? I shall not argue with you. My answer is final. No." She glanced at Denuth, met the grim smile in his eyes. Was it possible that the careful building of decades would soon be wiped away, that the hopes and plans of Tomb and her people lay helpless before the whims of this arrogant child with the lusts and appetites of a man? In Tomb he would still be a student, learning the responsibilities as well as the rights of citizenship. A coldness ran through her as she pictured Tomb under his rule. Then Denuth's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Even if the Mattia had not taken the initiative, my answer would still be the same. No, Ald of Nimbor, no. If you mean to enslave us, you will have to work for your victory. And superior war machine or not, the people of Tomb will make your triumph a hardly bought one, if indeed you can triumph against a free people." It was hard to keep a calm face as the prince tried first to scowl, then to sneer. If only this were the comic melodrama it should have been. But no, if Nimbor's claims were based on fact, then there would be no more laughter for Tomb and her people. Arl's tones were mockingly courteous. "You speak well, Denuth, but your words prove your incapacity to govern anyone. What were your redoubtable Lugarth and the invincible hordes from Bahur, of which you Tumians made so much? In whose name you still deem yourself secure from conquest? They were no more than barbarians, savages armed with spears and swords. Good fighters, I grant you, but helpless before the new warfare of which I am master. Do you think I am lying? This is your last chance. When you see your armies burned to cinders before your eyes, see your fields and towns incinerated, then it will be too late to bargain. Then you will come to me with pleas for peace, but I shall not hear you." His eyes fell upon her again, possessively. "Then I shall not honour you with the title of Princess Umith of Tomb. Woe to the conquered! You forget the matter of scientific progress, Tumians. We left your stupid notions of international relations behind long ago. If you surrender now, I guarantee the land of Tomb the same care as I bestow upon Nimbor. Otherwise, it shall be treated as a conquered province." He stood up, glaring. "I give you your last chance. Yield now." She rose lightly, as did the others, meeting his gaze with eyes steady and unafraid. "Tomb does not yield. Earn your victory if you can. We are ready." A chorus of assents indicated that she spoke for all. Ald bowed with an exaggerated gesture, swept a final lecherous glance in her direction, then withdrew as Denuth rang a bell signalling attendance. Once the other had gone, he sank back into the chair, his eyes passing from one official to another. She gripped his hand. "Do you think he can do as he claims?" "I greatly fear so. The reports from our agents sound incredible, almost like wizardry. A projector that casts an invisible light, causing whomsoever it touches to die at once, as if boiling to death. If they be true, then Tomb is lost." Down below, in another part of the palace, the emissaries of Nimbor prepared to depart. Ard was whispering to one. What he said was scarcely understood, but the smiles on the faces of both could be taken as indicative. "We will be waiting at the Corian gate," said Ald in departing. The other bowed and beckoned to two attendants of Nimbor. An hour passed. At the Corian gate to the palace grounds, facing the wide smooth road that led to Nimbor, 1,000 miles away, rested a black torpedo-shaped two-wheeled vehicle, now balanced by temporary legs set out from under it. Painted on the door to its single cabin was the imperial shield of Nimbor. Seated within, at the controls, was a man of Nimbor's party. Occasional puffs of smoke emitted from the rocket tubes at the rear as the ship was being kept ready for instant use. Ald himself waited impatiently in the road, fretting under the watchful eyes of the Commonwealth guards at the gate. Finally, he caught sight of something and addressed the guards. "They are my companions. Open the gate, guards, and let them through." He seemed to stare a moment at the oncomers, then called, "What's the matter with Eld? Why are you carrying him?" One of the two men approaching answered, "He slipped on a staircase and fell, your highness. He is unconscious and seems to have broken his leg. We thought it best to give temporary treatment now, then bring him back with us. It is why we were late, your highness." The prince nodded approval, motioned them to hasten. As they went through the gates, one of the Tumian guards looked down at the face of the black-covered body and checked it off his list. The men of Nimbor entered the rocket-mobile, shut the door. A terrific roar as the vehicle got under way, then it had vanished down the long road. Inside the conveyance, Ald bent over the unconscious figure, looked down at the scarred masculine features of one of the soldiers who had accompanied him. Then, with a chuckle, he put his hand on the yellow hair and pulled. The entire face seemed to fall apart. Beneath the extremely convincing mask was the face of Umith, lying unconscious. "It worked beautifully," he commented. "What of Eld? Did he make his escape through the merchant's entrance as planned?" "Yes, Highness. They suspected nothing, nor did we have any trouble in kidnapping the Mattia. There were no guards in her room, and she had succumbed before she suspected the presence of a gas tube. They won't know she is missing before we have arrived in the city." Within the hour, the rocketmobile had passed the border and was in the capital of Nimbo. It was noon on the day set for attack. Ald and the commanders of the staff awaited the Emperor's coming within a small enclosure just inside the walls of Nimbo. Outside, in the row beyond the open gate, a rocket vehicle awaited in readiness to take them to the front. Umith was there as well. "You see," drawled Ald, "we make good our boast. Very soon you will be joined by Danuth and the other Commonwealth officials as our prisoner. You really should have married me when you had the chance. It would have saved many lives." Umith stared at him frostily. "The people of Tomb would never have yielded to such filth as you, even had we betrayed them. It would have made no difference. We of Tomb have self-respect and honor to a degree that I fear is outside of your understanding." His laugh was not pleasant. "Still prattling over your little foolishness, honor, respect? What are they to the destinies of nations and dynasties? Such delusions are hardly worthy of the Umith I might have married." He seized a scroll from one of the officers standing nearby, shook it before her. Here is honor and respect. Here is such a thing as makes greatness. These are the designs of our war machines. This is what will teach the Tumians respect." Without answering, Umith snatched the paper cylinder out of Ald's hand and darted forward. Straight toward the open gate she fled, toward the rocketmobile outside. A wild, insane scheme of seizing this and escaping to her own land in time possessed her. Caught off guard, the men were already at a disadvantage. They knew even as they raced she could not be caught before reaching the gate. With energy born of desperation, she hurled herself forward. But, just as she was upon it, 2 soldiers stepped through and dashed at her. At this point occurred what has gone down in history as the miracle that saved Tomb. It is something for which no parallel in all history can be found. It caused Umith to rise from the status of a beautiful and capable martyr to that of a goddess. Umith stated later what were her feelings and experiences. She saw the 2 oncoming soldiers quite clearly. Her only thought then was to dash between them. Then there came a terrible shock, an awful jolting as if she had been struck by a thunderbolt. The scene before her eyes dissolved instantaneously into a featureless grey. She felt herself seemingly detached, as one might feel in the throes of delirium. For only a few seconds the strange sensation lasted. The only thing that she remembered seeing was a momentary impression of a single vision hanging before her eyes. What she saw was a man. She does not recollect how he was clad. He seemed to be sitting on a bench. Behind him she saw distinctly a blue wall, in nature metallic. In the wall was an open door through which only greyness could be seen. The face of the man was held close to hers. He seemed to be staring at her. It was the face of a middle-aged man, of one powerful. 2 clear brown eyes looked into hers. A mass of wavy chestnut hair surmounted the godlike brow, and the figure was smiling. For only the minutest fraction of a second this lasted, then the greyness returned. Yet, in a few seconds it too had cleared away. The terrible blankness and queer feeling vanished abruptly as it had come. She could again see about her. The castle of Ald and the men of Nimbo apparently had dissolved. Above her rose the sides of the palace of the directors of Tomb, and about her were the men of Tomb. For a moment Umith and the men stared at one another, each mutually startled and disbelieving what they saw. Finally one of them recovered sufficiently to speak. "Matthias Umith, we thought you were being held captive in Nimbo. What do you here? How did you get here?" She could only reply hesitatingly, "I don't know. I was at Nimbo, trying to escape. Then everything went dark, and I found myself standing here." She started to put a hand to her forehead, then saw she was holding something. The scroll. Her eyes flashed. "Quick, summon the council. I have here the plans for the death machine of Nimbo. Bid them hurry. We have no time to lose." Joris, military director of Tomb, pounded the table with his fist. "Damn! We know everything the enemy knows now. We have the plans so that we can meet them on their own terms. But they're on their way to attack us now, and we haven't even a working model. It's all here, but only on paper. We can save Tomb, yes, but we cannot prevent the devastation of our fields and towns, nor the slaughter of our helpless non-combatants. We can only exact a vengeance and prevent a final triumph for the part of the enemy." Before Danuth could speak, a man burst into the chamber, hair dishevelled, gasping for breath. On his face was an expression of amazement and joy commingled. Twice he tried to speak, and could emit only gasps for breath. He clasped the shoulders of Joris, turned to the others. At length speech returned to him, and he spoke slowly, deliberately. "The weapons of Nimbo are ours. They are here, within the walls of the palace. I cannot tell you how they came, nor can any of the guards, but we have all seen them, have examined their workings. We do not yet understand their principles." At this point another man burst in, equally distrait and out of breath. "Directors!" he cried. "Tomb is saved!" He fell to rapid, heavy breathing, while his eyes sought first one, then another of those assembled. He waved his hand reassuringly as Danuth started to speak. "No, directors, I speak truly. I am one of the prison guards. We suddenly heard noises from one of the unoccupied cells. Naturally, we hurried over and looked in. Inside, we saw Ald and the Emperor of Nimbo, with his entire staff. They don't know how they got there. I presume that you would not want us to release them immediately." A roar of laughter from Joris greeted the speaker. He smote the guard on the back with the palm of his huge hand, so that the fellow staggered against the table. "No, not immediately. We have other things to do first. But we're not too busy to vote you the Order of the Commonwealth, and see if there isn't a better position for you to fill than that of prison guard." He turned to the others. "The enemy will be completely disorganized and demoralized by this. I propose we move at once upon Nimbo, attack strategic points, and refrain as much as possible from such destruction as will make miserable the lot of the Nimborian people, who are not responsible for their degenerate rulers. I propose we make contracts with the Nimborian commoners and urge them immediately to revolt against what is left of the Ald Rachnud regime, strike for their own freedom." And now we must go back in time, must travel to another part of space. We must leave planet P, where lie Nimbo and Tomb, for a return to Earth time. Only thus can we have a logical understanding of the events related above. 2. At an angle above the plane of the ecliptic over the orbits of the asteroids was a long metal craft, resembling somewhat a cross between a towerless submarine and an all-metal zeppelin. In the forward cabin 6 men were gathered. They comprised the entire crew and command of the vessel. Although an official meeting, there was about it none of the stiffness that marks such an event in military circles on Earth. On an interplanetary vessel, every man's life is in the hands of every other man. The captain is obeyed, not because of his rank primarily, but because the lives of all depend upon explicit conformation to discipline. But in this vital discipline there is no place for the sham of stiff-necked formality. Thus, captain, officer, or member of the crew spoke to each other with frankness and mutual respect. Captain Wonderman looked around, mentally checking to see if all were present. Lieutenant Alfred Rokesmith, Webber the scientist, Op, explorer and cook extraordinary, Mullins, skilled mechanical specialist, Barth, doctor and general overseer of vital supplies. Wonderman smiled. "I guess you're all eager to find out whither we're heading, eh?" "We sure would," spoke up Op. "Especially after that terrifically long period of acceleration," added Webber. 3 days of it! Beats all my experience." "It was necessary to achieve our speed. We're going a long way. Have to make the trip as short as possible. We'll be putting on still more acceleration once the asteroids are behind us." "Neptune?" asked Barth. "Pluto?" "Farther than either." "You don't mean Planet P, do you?" spoke up Mullins. "The one that was discovered last year that hasn't been given a name yet?" "Right. I never did get quite clear on the subject of Planet P," drawled Rokesmith. "Just how was it discovered?" Captain Wonderman cleared his throat. "Few people are. Even the experts don't know much about it. Its existence was first surmised and calculated in 1931, about 100 years ago, by Professor William H. Pickering of Jamaica. He observed that the planet Uranus was being displaced from its proper orbit. Of course, this perturbation could be due only to the influence of another planet, he thought. But there was no other body known at that time which could account for the drag. Thus, the professor computed mathematically the existence, approximate size, and position of an unknown body which would account for the odd behavior of Uranus. This he calculated to be a giant planet of a diameter of approximately 44,000 miles, in mass the third greatest in the solar system. He puts its distance to range in an elliptical orbit of from 5,000 million miles to 9,000 million miles from the Sun. This, of course, made it extra-Plutonian in position. Its year would be in length about 656 earthly years. He gave it the temporary name of Planet P. Planet P's existence was further indicated by the orbits of some 16 comets, also affected by a drag which the theoretical planet made perfectly accountable. Last year, the planet Neptune had finally arrived in the position where it, too, would be affected by this body. You understand, the astronomers, calculating both known and theoretical factors, determined that, if this planet P existed, an irregularity in Neptune's behavior would be discovered at this particular time. The predicted irregularity arrived on time. Thus, due to this added information, our astronomers were able to find out precisely where the new planet should be sought, and they found it. It is indeed an immense thing, shows a perceptible disk even at its great distance from Earth. We may anticipate something different when we arrive. Days went by, endless days, marked only by the chronometer in the unchanging blackness of the celestial void. The tiny pinpoints of myriad stars glowed unchangingly. Behind them, a few planets grew more and more minute, each in turn finally being blotted out by the corona of the Sun. Jupiter's orbit was left behind. They saw the great ringed planet loom up to one side and fade away as all the others had done. But this was not with the flashing speed of objects and cities passing the rocket vehicle on Earth. It was a matter of days before each change could be realized, weeks before a planet filled the entire spaceports. Onward and outward. Celebrations when at last Uranus was passed, the hitherto outpost of interplanetary exploration. Eventually, pale Neptune, mysterious planet, passed under them, directly in their path, its great misty, frigid sphere glowing eerily in the twilight of outer worlds. Outward, tiny Pluto was too far off to be seen, but its orbit was past. For 100 years, the outpost of the solar system, now dethroned by the enormous newcomer, its passing was still a solemn moment. Then, one day, Bath observed a tiny light where no light should be. Celebration again rang through the vessel. Planet P was sighted. Days of deceleration followed. The rockets flamed, but no longer from the stern of the vessel. Days of a continual blasting from the vessel's prow until at last the unbelievable acceleration was neutralized. Now the planet had grown, until, even with their greatly decreased speed, it filled the view. Still more blasting until the ship was virtually drifting along, caught only by the gravity of the monstrous new world. A great disk glowing dimly in the light of the stars, especially in the light of one particularly brilliant star that was the Earthman's sun. The vaguest hints of geological features could be seen. Planet P. The rockets flared again in an intricate pattern. Balanced on the pattern, the ship was lowered, slowly, into the atmosphere of the strange world. About it flamed a red glow as proof of atmosphere. An atmosphere, doubtless, of some unknown gases that would not congeal in the awful cold. And finally, a shrill whistling penetrating the triple-thick walls, a dull thud, and a silence as she came to rest. The voyage was over. Man had reached the outermost limits of the solar system, had arrived safely at the mysterious outer world, Planet P. The men gathered in spacesuits. "Each man will take searchlights and emergency rations. You will obey Lieutenant Rokesmith and myself implicitly. Only on pledges of such obedience from all of you can I permit a planet party to land." Each member of the crew spoke his agreement. "Mullins, take a coil of rope. Webber, the barometer and compass. Bath, the camera and flash. Are you sure your gravity controls are adjusted to decrease your weight to Earth normal? Make sure, everyone. That goes for me, too." "Check." Rokesmith turned the lever and swung the thick outer port open. Wonderman stepped out onto the ground. The others followed. Above them was a deep blue sky strewn with stars, though lacking in the abundant distribution of the outer void. Beneath their feet lay a clay-like expanse. They looked about them. There was something dark looming up in the starlight a distance away. The captain started off in that direction, beckoned the others to follow. All felt that strange sensation that comes for everyone when he stands on the terrain of an alien planet. It makes no difference how often this experience has been undergone previously. The sensation cannot be shaken off. "It looks like a wall," sang out Opp as they reached the looming thing. Rokesmith turned the beam of his flashlight on it. "It is a wall." Unmistakably, it was a structure made of many square blocks of stone fitted together to form a section rising into the air from a foundation. Webber flashed his light around. "It ends here." The men hesitated to go around. What could this enigmatic wall be doing on this frigid world? The instruments showed the temperature to be many 100 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. What beings would have built this great wall? What could it mean? But at last they did go around the edifice, flashing their lights before them, and nearly collapsed from the shock of what they saw. A broad paved street on which bordered many stone houses whose glass windows reflected the dim glow of the stars above. The tiny sun cast a faint illumination on it all. "People!" gasped Mullins. There were. Standing on the streets and in the doors of the houses were the dim figures of men, unmistakably human in form. "They're not alive," observed Rokesmith. "At least they're not moving," replied Bath quickly. "Come on, then. Why are we waiting? Are you afraid of a lot of statues?" Captain Wonderman suited action to his words as he strode forward, stopping directly before the first of the standing figures. He cast his beam over it from head to foot. Unmistakably, it was a man, clad in clothes and undeniably human. Its features were perfectly normal, bore the flash of life. The feet and entire body were set in attitude as if in the act of taking a step, but it was motionless. "Some statue," breathed Op. "I would swear it was a real man." "It is a real man," said Barth softly. He bent close to the face. "It has the paws and tiny hairs that can only be on a true body." "Then he must have been alive once," murmured Webber. "What do you suppose happened to him? Is he petrified or only frozen solid?" "Frozen, I think," said Barth. "Yet it is very strange. His flesh is still soft and resilient. It is not natural." "A land of frozen people." Captain Wonderman's words struck a chilling note in all of them. Quickly they investigated the other figures. Some men, some women, some old, some young, all kinds and types. All apparently had been frozen solid in the middle of their normal activities. None showed any sign of being aware that death had struck. When the terrible freezing occurred, it must have happened so swiftly, instantaneously, as to have caught all unaware. They moved on, saying little. There was that same eerie atmosphere that one finds in a wax museum while passing about among the realistic but silent and motionless figures of apparently ordinary people. Add to that the grim knowledge that the figures they now saw had been alive, that in effect the explorers were in a monstrous planet-wide graveyard. They went on, coming to wide roads down which lines of marching men stood silently in attitudes startling like some paintings of men marching to war. Undoubtedly they were soldiers. Once or twice along the line the Earthmen saw huge projectile-like instruments mounted on wheels being taken along with the marchers. "Say, look at this scene," called out Rokesmith. He was standing before an open gate, staring in at the courtyard of a large, pretentious stone building. Before the gate stood two guards who evidently had been frozen just as they were turning about to stare in through the entrance. On their faces was a look of aroused inquiry. Inside the courtyard was a dramatic tableau. A young woman of great beauty was fixed in the posture of running. Her foot was lifted from the ground, her body thrust forward, her face strained, hair flowing backwards as if the wind were brushing it back. In one hand, tightly grasped, was a scroll. Directly behind her stood a young man with a look of astonishment and anger on a face that was cruel and evil. His hand was still held outstretched, as if to grasp after the scroll that the woman was fleeing with. All about, in similar positions of astonishment and anxiety, were other men, some of whom had started forward as if about to commence a pursuit. "Some scene, eh?" murmured Barth. "Looks real dramatic. I wish we could know what it was all about." "That's an idea," burst from Wonderman. "Why didn't I think of it sooner? Barth, we can use the mentoscope on these frozen people, with the attachments that are used to read the minds of the newly dead, can't we?" "I think we can, Captain. These people are perfectly preserved. There's no reason why we can't shoot a current through their brains and get the information stored there." They turned, commenced to retrace their steps to the ship. It took them about 10 minutes to reach the street by which they had entered the city and come to the vessel. Once inside, they hastened to unpack the mentoscope and its attendant apparatus. When at last they were ready, they left the airlock and started back. The return to the ship had taken them about 20 minutes. They entered the street of the city that had first chanced upon. As they passed the first figure, Webber suddenly whirled around and stared at it. "Look! Stop and look at this man!"
The others gathered around. "Does he look the same to you? It seemed to me that it was his other leg which was being put forward when last we saw him. I'm sure his arms were in a different position." They stared amazedly. The figure certainly was not in the identical posture as before. Webber's observations had been correct. All the rest of them seemed to be planted in slightly different postures too. Captain Wonderman bent down, studied the arm of the man carefully. He remained silent for some time, then he stood up. There was a tone of awe and bewilderment in his voice when he spoke. "It has moved, and what is more, it is still moving. I saw that hand pass a given point on the body of the person in a few minutes. It's like watching the hands of a clock. At first, they do not seem to move at all, but if you watch closely enough for a time, you can observe the motion." "Do you mean this fellow is still alive?" "It would seem so." "But why the slow motion?" asked Op. "I think," said the captain slowly, "that the mentoscope can help us answer the whole business." They came to the courtyard of the running woman. The tableau had changed. It seemed as if a few seconds had passed since they left. Now the figure of the woman was closer to the gate. The two guards from outside had passed through and were going forward to seize her, while the men behind were in full running appearance, as if, having recovered from a surprise move, they were taking to pursuit. "All right, men, set down the apparatus." Two men set down a small battery, attached it to wires leading from a large metal helmet which another was placing over the head of the still woman figure. Other wires were attached to the spacesuit helmet worn by Captain Wonderman. Through the glassite panes it could be seen that he was wearing a somewhat similar helmet himself, having donned this while back on the ship. A current of electrical energy was passed from an electrode pressed against one particular part of the woman's head through to another leading out. In passing through the brain of the woman, the current picked up the last and deepest occurrences in the life of the person subjected to it. It activated the cells on which these events were recorded in a form much like that of a charged body. Passing out of the brain, it carried these impressions with it and brought them to the mind of the operator as distinct thoughts. Since basic thoughts are not expressed in any language save impressions and pictures, the operator finds that he has suddenly acquired the knowledge of the other. Thus, in a brief time, Wonderman told the men of the story concerning Nimbo and Tomb, of the Matthias part in the drama. The men stood in wonder, staring at the figures. Op calmly walked over to Ard and tweaked his nose. The Nimborian's expression did not change. "I still can't grasp why these people are all like frozen statues," exclaimed Barth. "How can they live and act like everyday terrestrials when this planet is so lacking in heat and light?" "I think I can explain," said Wonderman. "It sounds fantastic, but it is not impossible, and it would account for all the factors. I'll tell you when we get back to the ship. Right now, we have work to do." "What work?" "We can't stand around and do nothing while this woman is captured. And I, for one, do not care to see these sneering degenerates win this war. So I think we'll take over events on this planet for a while and fix things to suit ourselves. We can easily move these figures if we adjust our gravity belt to take care of the extra weight. Every man grab one person. I'll take Umith. Rokesmith, you take Ald. Webber, grab the Emperor. And you others pick out those who look important, who appear like staff officers. And don't forget the mentoscope." In a moment each man was burdened with a native of Planet P swinging over his shoulder. Thus burdened, they marched through the center of Nimbo, through the columns of the motionless army, back to the spaceship. Several times they would have to halt and rest because of the irrepressible laughter that broke out among them. Imagine earthly problems being solved like this. In the ship, they dumped the Nimborians in a spare storehouse, while the Messiah was propped up on a seat in one of the cabins. The ship's course was set for the general direction of Tomb. "You men understand what is meant by time?" began Wonderman as the crew gathered around. "It is the flow of events. It is the way we conceive things happening. We place an arbitrary measurement of time by using the period it takes our planets to rotate once on its axis. That is a day. Dividing the day into sections, we get hours, minutes, and seconds. To us, a second is a very short space of time. We move and live at a certain rate of speed. Our heart pumps about 72 beats per minute. Our senses perceive a thing in a certain space of time. Small as it may appear, it actually requires time for your eye to see an object or for your hearing to function. Also for an impression of feeling to travel from the skin to the brain and to be recognized. To these people of Planet P, their world appears as one delightful to live in. For them, a bright, warm sun shines in a blue sky. For them, life moves at as quick a pace as it does for us on Earth. Their day is approximately 24 hours also. To us, it may appear to be as long as 656 Earth days, since their world requires 656 Earth days to complete one of its days, and I am figuring in proportion. To them, a day is no longer than to us. 10 4/5 hours to us is only one of their minutes. That is why they live so slowly. They are living at a different time rate than ours. Time moves for them exactly 656 times more slowly than it does for us. They could not possibly live at our pace, for, to us, Planet P is terribly cold. The sun is but little more than a bright star, but when they see the sun, it takes 656 times longer before they observe it. Thus, they actually get a time exposure. You know that if you want to take a picture at night, you must leave the lens open for a long time. The longer it is open, the brighter the picture appears. Thus with them. They see the sun as a brilliant ball. They see objects as highly illuminated because their eyes are absorbing so much more light than are ours. Thus, their bodies are not cold and frozen. Over make-up to conform with the time rate on this planet, their bodies absorb and hold the heat radiated by the sun until it appears to be hot. If you examine any of these bodies now without your gloves, you will notice that they are as warm as ours. These people seem to be motionless, or at least moving extremely slowly. To them, they are moving at a normal pace. Here is where the size of this planet comes in. Under the huge gravity of this world, they could not move fast. Their bodies must normally weigh a terrific amount. That was another factor working in their evolution toward the strange rate of time flow. Wonderman left the room. He went back to where he had placed Umith seated upright in the cabin. Seating himself directly before her eyes, he stared into them. He fixed himself motionless as possible, remained unmoving until the ship was ready to come to a halt at its destination. Before he left, he had the satisfaction of noticing that Matthias's pupil had finally focused on his. He felt certain that some impression would be carried back with her. Landing at Tomb, they placed Umith where she was later to regain control of her senses. They carried Ald and the others down to the dungeons, imprisoning them there. Then they returned to the ship. One more task remained: the war machines of Nimbor. Cruising over the enemy lines, they dropped cables whenever they saw a projector and attached them. Then they swung them up into the air, letting them hang below until all had been thus captured. Once more they returned to Tomb, this time to place the projectors where they would be found quickly. The nature of the burning death of Nimbor they found to be simple. It was nothing more or less than electric heaters, such as are sold in winter on Earth. A polished reflector sent a beam of heat from the wire coil in the center. To a terrestrial, of course, this was nothing more than a pleasantly warm current, but to a native of planet P, with their slower perceptions and great absorption of tiny amounts of heat, it was a ray of pure destruction. Thus, for a brief instant in the history of the cosmos, two similar races and life forms met, the one greatly altering the course of development the other would take. Although a few well-guarded expeditions to planet P have been made since, the Terrestrial Council is slow to permit these, inasmuch as the gross difference in time rate cannot permit fair intercourse with its people. It is felt in scientific circles that for them to learn of the existence of a race such as ours would be a crushing psychological blow to them. To interfere, however well-meaningly, in their development would condemn them to superstition, for they could arrive at no logical scientific explanation of such interference. Planet P is not needed for the comfort or well-being of Earth. The patrol is there watching, ready to step in cases of natural cosmic emergency, but at other times gives the world a wide berth. And Captain Wonderman will always remember the tableau in the courtyard, and a beautiful woman running.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. Date of publication 2083 AD by Joseph Samuelson, writing as William Morrison. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, October-November 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. It seemed incredible, thought Carrie Samuelson, that a simple postcard like that could have involved her in so much trouble. If it had been something important, like her getting a new hairdo, or rearranging the living room, or buying a new evening gown, she might have expected all sorts of perfectly amazing results to follow. But from the postcard and the fact that she had sent James instead of going herself, she expected nothing at all. It had come, she remembered, that morning when she was so busy getting Barbara ready to go back to college. All those clothes to try on, and hems to let out, and shoes to fit, and right in the middle of everything. "Dear Madam," she was informed, "the Perfect Hostess by Wilhelmina Hoskins, which you reserved, is now being held for you. Please call for it within the next 48 hours. At first, Mrs. Samuelson was annoyed. She had reserved the book 3 months before, and her feeling of need for it had long since died away. Nevertheless, it occurred to her, a book which was in such demand that you had to wait 3 months for it must be pretty good. It wouldn't hurt to take a look at it. She spoke to James about it, but he was only 11, and there was a baseball game in which he had to pitch, and he didn't have any time. And honest, Ma'am, either you get that book for me, or you don't receive her allowance for next week, she said firmly. James got the book for her. But on the way home he stopped off to play baseball, and when he finally arrived she recalled she hadn't asked him about it. The next morning she remembered it just as he was leaving for school. "I put it in the parlour, Mum," said James, and departed. But she couldn't find it in the parlour, and there were so many things to do, like cleaning up the mess Barbara had left in her room and fixing the rips in James' pants. She wondered if any other 11-year-old on earth could rip so much so often, that she forgot all about it for a while. It was as if there had been no postcard, no book. At least, that was the way it was, for a time. 2 days later, when Bill came home from work, he dumped himself into an easy chair and said, "Saw a funny thing today." "I had a letter at last from Barbara," said Carrie absently, patting her hair into place and wondering what her husband would think of her if now, at the age of 40, she dyed her hair red. Bill always told her that as a brunette she was both young-looking and pretty. The question was, would he tell her the same thing if she were a redhead? Probably not. Men were foolishly conservative about such things. "Barbara said school supplies are very expensive this year," she went on. "She wants more money." It was really funny. If she could ignore his conversation, he could ignore hers right back. That was one of the unfortunate things, she realized, that marriage taught a man. "You know that vacant lot with a broken fence, where the kids play? Know who I saw playing baseball there today?" "James, of course. But Bill," Barbara said. "James was pitching, but you'll never guess who was catching." Bill was being silly, just like the big baby he was. At his age, to think that a children's baseball game was important. But she didn't mind humouring him. She guessed, "That big puffy-faced boy from down the street, with the hair so blonde it's almost invisible." "No." He leaned back, waiting for her to guess again. "I'm sure I haven't any idea who it was," she said. "But does it matter? According to Barbara, it was Reardon, the cop. You know, the one with the stomach." "Reardon?" She stared at him. "Why, he's been chasing them off that lot every day. He hates kids. You must be mistaken." "I'm not mistaken. He was catching there, acting like a kid himself, when who should come along out of a police car but Lieutenant Puffinger from the local precinct. Well, you should have heard him when he saw what Reardon was doing. I'll bet those kids learned a few words they didn't know before. It seems that Reardon hadn't made his call from the street box, and the cars were scouting around trying to find out what had become of him. And here he was, playing baseball." "Imagine that," said Carrie, but her heart was still elsewhere. She said, "Barbara says—" So they talked of how much money to send Barbara, and Carrie thought that nobody could tell her how to manage a husband. You pretended to listen to him, and whatever he said you let go in one ear and out the other, while you kept your mind on the really important thing. But she was to remember Reardon later. The next day there was a rumpus at the school. What happened there was even more incredible than the doings of Reardon. The local superintendent was proud of his neatly operated educational system, and had set that date for showing around a group of distinguished visitors. Neither the newspapers nor Carrie ever managed to get straight at exactly what point things had begun to go wrong. When they tried to trace the events of that day, practically all the distinguished visitors, including 2 college presidents, the president of the Board of Education, a professor of educational psychology, and 2 heads of normal schools, gave different and conflicting stories. What did come out, however, was that all 6 visitors had distinguished themselves in a quite unexpected way. They had run around the school madly, waving torches and yelling, "Down with school! Down with school! Burn the place down!" The firemen had arrived in time to prevent much damage, but the incendiaries had been rounded up only with great difficulty after school had been dismissed. The president of the Board of Education had beaten up the superintendent, and the 2 college presidents had ganged up on one of the hastily summoned policemen. Later on, they could give no reason for why they had done so. "It's a crazy world," thought Carrie wisely. "You never know what sort of lunatic you'll run into next." And then she put it out of her mind and turned to a more important problem. What could she have for dinner that night that would please Bill and not make him say, "You know I never eat spinach," or broccoli, or a new sauce, or whatever it was he was never eating that week? All the same, it didn't surprise her greatly when Bill came home the day after and said, "You'll never guess what happened at the office." "Somebody else went crazy." "Nobody went crazy. We all slept. What? We all slept. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Elvegard came in and said, "All right, boys and girls, we've been working too hard, all of us. Let's take a nice long rest today, shall we? Put your pretty little heads on your pretty little desks. 1, 2, 3, snooze." "You're joking." Cross my heart and hope to die. We all fell asleep, and we stayed asleep till 4:30, and then he woke us up and sent us home early so we wouldn't get caught in the worst of the subway rush. Carrie looked at him and said absolutely nothing. What had happened at school had been bad enough, but this was absolutely incredible. There were times when Bill was a great kidder, and she wasn't sure whether to take him seriously or not. This appeared to be one of the times when he was not to be taken seriously. Even if there were the faintest chance that he was telling the truth, she thought it best not to encourage him by pretending to believe a story like that. It was harder, however, to take things as a joke when something just as silly happened to her. In this case, she could remember almost every word exactly, without having the slightest idea of what had caused the whole conversation to take so unexpected a turn. The usual group was in for bridge. They had been playing for about half an hour. That skinny Mrs. Cayley munching away daintily at all the richest cakes, as if she thought they might put some decent flesh on her. Mrs. Monroe making a great fuss about the fact that the special candies she was eating were non-nutritive and therefore non-fattening. The others just eating normally, and too much as the mood struck them. Mrs. Monroe was dummy, and by some shrewdly ill-timed advice managed to make her partner go down 3. Her partner was furious, but Mrs. Monroe just giggled. "You'll never guess who I saw with somebody else's wife," she said in her loud whisper. "Really?" said Mrs. Cayley. "Janet's husband?" "Not in a million years. It was my husband." Carrie sat up as if she had received an electric shock. This was a new sort of gossip. "Well, at least your Bruce has good taste in women," said Mrs. Cayley generously. "Now, when my husband steps out, well, really, I'm ashamed of him. Of course, I suppose he does the best he can, poor dear." That was the way it went the rest of that afternoon. When Carrie thought back to it later, she shuddered. She had never before taken part in such a gossip session, and she hoped that she never would again. Each of them had chatted, not about some absent individual, but about herself and her own relations. What skeletons had popped out of the closets? It was the morning after that Barbara's letter came. "We had the funniest basketball game last night," wrote Barbara. "Our team was playing the girls from State College, and right in the middle of the game, when it was so exciting and we were all yelling like mad, our captain, instead of shooting at the basket, suddenly stopped and said, 'This is no fun, girls. Let's aim for something big.' And she turned right around and threw the ball as hard as she could at Professor Hazelhurst's head, the one who teaches chemistry. You know, I've told you about him. And then all the players began to throw the ball at people in the crowd. You can imagine the uproar. The referees were blowing the whistles, and all the girls were yelling and rushing to get out, and I was afraid some of them would get hurt. But at last President Newsom managed to quiet things down, and they stopped the game. They've called in Professor Griggs, who teaches psychology, but she admits that she hasn't the slightest idea why it happened. Some of the girls say it was gamblers, and they bribed the players, but that's so silly. Nobody ever bets on our games. It's just one of those mysteries that it looks like they'll never solve." Carrie read with amazement, going back again and again to make sure that she hadn't misinterpreted Barbara's scraggly script. She hadn't. Toward the end of the letter, Barbara added something that surprised her almost as much as the account of the basketball game. "You'll never guess who wrote to me. Your dear son, James. It's the first time in his life he ever had anything to say to his sister. It must have been quite a sacrifice for him to spare the 3 cents for the stamp. But seriously, Mother, I was touched.
He's really a very good kid at heart. He didn't say much, but from him the very idea of writing means a lot. I've misplaced the letter now, but I'll let you see it later. It was so very amusing." She would have to say something nice to James, thought Carrie. He was, she agreed with Barbara, a most thoughtful boy. He had changed of late. Not that he behaved very differently about hanging up his coat or leaving his shoes in the middle of the floor at night, but there was something about him, she couldn't tell what, that made her feel he was a treasure among sons, a joy and a comfort. She was aware of a feeling of pride in him that night when she and Bill left him staring at the television set. He had promised faithfully to go to bed at 9:30, and as she kissed him she said, "Don't forget to have a glass of milk and some jam and bread." "And don't forget to go to bed at 9:30, growled Bill. "He won't forget," said Carrie. "He promised. Good night, dear." As he closed the door behind them, Bill said, "Bet he stays up till 10 at least." "You don't appreciate him," replied Carrie. "He's an extraordinary boy." "No different from any other kid, except that he's ours." "He's very much different. I'm afraid you're not very perceptive about these things." Bill growled again, something unintelligible this time, and the conversation died down. "The romance is out of our marriage," thought Carrie. "A husband like Bill is never very polite, except, of course, to other men's wives. He takes me for granted, just as he takes his children. But he won't behave to the others tonight as casually as he behaves to me. I remember that time Mrs. Gamber was over at the Munros. You would have thought that woman was a poor, delicate, fragile little flower who had to be tenderly cared for, whereas we all know she has the strength of a horse. Looks a little like one, too. What any man can see in her." "Why, hello, Mrs. Gamber," she said as they entered the Munro house. "I was hoping so much that we'd find you and your husband here again this evening. Clara said that you were afraid you wouldn't be able to get out. How is little Elsie?" "Much better, thank you." So much for formal politeness. Bill, of course, was all set to treat her with his usual tenderness when Clara Munro said, "They have the most wonderful program on tonight. Let's look at it for a while." Carrie didn't mind at all. At least, looking at the screen would keep Bill from worrying too much about Mrs. Gamber. Although, goodness knows, if they had meant to watch television, they might as just as well stayed home with their own son. But Clara was right about one thing. The program was wonderful, unexpectedly wonderful. The Master of Ceremonies came out and announced the famous personalities he was going to display within the next few minutes, and then there were the usual commercials, and after that the first dramatic sketch. It was a love scene between the current great lover and a very famous leading lady. It would have brought tears to the most callous viewer's eyes, only the great lover suddenly became an exact duplicate of Bill, and the leading lady was Mrs. Gamber. Carrie rubbed her eyes, but that was how they looked. Then she stared around at Bill and Mrs. Gamber, then in the room with her, then at Clara Munro and the others. No one seemed to see anything strange. She felt that she couldn't stand it. At the most tender moment her fists clenched, and she found herself standing up. "Stop it!" she shouted. The great lover, who looked like Bill, seemed to turn and look right at her. And then the telephone rang, and he no longer looked like Bill at all. He wore a 6-shooter and a 10-gallon hat and chaps and spurs. He answered the phone and said, "Them diamond-backed owlhoots are raiding the Barbie spread, partner, down in Red-Eye Gulch. Gotta act fast to stop them, partner." Carrie's eyes opened wide. The tone was caressing, full of tender passion, but the words... The leading lady had changed too. She no longer looked like Mrs. Gamber. She replied happily, "If we spare our horses, partner, we can ambush them galoots at Bald Eagle Pass. Shake a leg, partner.
and we'll learn them rattlers a lesson they'll never forget." The scene blacked out. After a second or two, a perspiring master of ceremonies appeared and stammered, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to technical difficulties beyond our control, we, cannot bring you the rest of this touching love scene. However, I know you'll just love our next attraction, a juggling act by that famous foursome, the Juggling Jugheads." Everything that the Juggling Jugheads touched seemed to be under a curse. It dropped, and shattered. Carrie had never been part of such an embarrassed audience. It was the most painful thing, outside of seeing Bill and Mrs. Gamber, that she had ever witnessed. Next came a comedy act. This was even worse. A famed star of slick, sophisticated comedy told jokes and made puns of which James would have been ashamed. Carrie hid her head in her hands. She said suddenly, "This is just too awful. Clara, please turn it off." Clara Munro was looking dazed herself. She turned off the set and said, "What on earth happened to them? In that first scene, the hero and heroine looked like you, Carrie, and Mr. Gamber." "Like me?" "Like you, Clara," said Mr. Munro. Carrie said, "I think we must all be seeing things. Anyway, they're usually so good, and tonight they were terrible." "There seems to be some sort of insanity abroad," said Bill, "and it almost looks as if it's catching." That was it, she thought. It was catching. She wondered where it would strike next. When they got home that night, they found James peacefully asleep. The glass from which he had drunk his milk was in the kitchen sink, along with the knife he had used to spread his jam. He had been a very obedient boy, thought Carrie, and once more her heart warmed to him. But he had his weaknesses. She realized that the next day when she was once more reminded of the book. It happened in the afternoon, after she had read another of Barbara's letters. Barbara was writing with a frequency little short of amazing. The basketball incident in the college was still the subject of discussion, and she just had to tell her mother how exciting things were. But behind that, felt Carrie, there was something else. Barbara was developing a sense of responsibility. She was growing up at last. Why, it was just a little while ago, she thought, that Barbara was a tiny infant. And now she'll be graduating from college and getting married, and... It was thus the most natural thing in the world for her to begin planning the details of Barbara's wedding. Maybe it would be a morning wedding, she thought. How many people should they invite? What sort of food should they serve, and what arrangements should they make about a reception? It was these questions that reminded her of the book. The perfect hostess would have all the answers, if anything would. But where was the perfect hostess hiding? She began to make another search for it, but the perfect hostess seemed to be a canny book. It was nowhere she looked, not in the parlour, nor in the hallway, nor in the bookcases, which she explored in the vain hope that some spasm of neatness had struck her son. "The little silly must have put it in his own room," she muttered finally. She climbed the stairs to look there. It was not on any of the shelves with his games or his other books, but when she lifted his pillow, she saw it at last. She opened the cover, and her library card stared her in the face. Then the book opened to the middle, apparently of its own accord, and a dirty thumbprint looked up at her. Obviously, James had been reading The Perfect Hostess. What on earth had got into him to do it? At that moment she heard the front door slam, and the next moment he was bouncing up the stairs. She turned around and faced him sternly. "James, what do you mean by hiding this book? You told me you put it in the parlour." He said hoarsely, "Look, Mother," and made a sudden motion with his right hand. Carrie felt her eyes glazing when suddenly the front door bell rang. That roused her.
She closed her eyes and shook her head. For a moment she had the queerest feeling. James said, "Mother, please, Mother," and made the same motion again. This time it was a bellowing voice that saved her. "Vegetables!" it called. The voice's owner had grown impatient of waiting and had opened the front door. "Vegetable order!" James was about to make the motion a third time when Carrie acted. Whatever possessed her to do such a thing she didn't know. It was as if some hidden person had given her a command, and she had misunderstood it. She slapped his face as hard as she could, and James fell back on the bed. She stood there, horrified at herself, when for a third time the voice called, "Vegetables! Say, lady, I can't stand her waiting all day." She ran down the stairs and said breathlessly, "Put them down. I'll pay you tomorrow. I have no time now. Please come back tomorrow. No, wait. Stay here for just another minute and yell vegetables again after I go back upstairs." Then she ran upstairs again, leaving him scratching his head in bewilderment. James was picking himself off the bed, looking more frightened than angry. He made a motion with his hand once more, but uncertainly this time, and Carrie did not let him finish it. She didn't even need the cry of "Vegetables!" to save her. She leaped at him and held his hands down to his sides. Then she tried to tie him down with a pillowcase. James was strong for his age, and he struggled hard, but she was more desperate than he, and she won. "Stay there," she ordered. Then she picked up the book again. "The Perfect Hypnotist," she read, "by William Haskins, 2083, U.S. Government Press." Why, 2083 was the date of publication, wasn't it? Impossible! The book had been handed out by mistake, of course, for the perfect hostess. But 2083? Incredible. It wasn't due to be written and published for another 100 years. You just couldn't confuse a book with something so far from coming into existence. In a trance, she turned the page. "Hypnotism is no subject for the uninitiated," she read. "It is a useful, but at the same time a most dangerous weapon in the arsenal of psychological treatment. The enormous advances made in the past century, especially from 1978 on." The past century. The more than a century yet to come, she thought. Impossible, she told herself again. This was not published in 2083. Or rather, it wouldn't be published until 2083. Why, the important discoveries wouldn't begin to be made until 1978. Then, what was it doing here? "This book is therefore not meant for general circulation, and should be kept out of the hands of all but qualified medical men." It should it? She looked at the list of chapters. Hypnotism general, hypnotism direct, hypnotism at one remove, hypnotism at second remove, specifically directed hypnotic acts, generally directed hypnotic conduct, hypnotism as therapy, mass hypnosis, hypnotism via electromagnetic waves, reverse electromagnetic effect. The list was incredible. The book looked thin enough, but there were over 1,000 pages in it. It was full of information. Too full. She still didn't understand how it had got to the library shelves, but at least one thing was clear. James must have started reading it that very first day Moya got it for her. He must have realized what it was and hidden it so that he might have a chance to study it. Hypnotism direct. That had been Reardon. Hypnotism at second and third removes. That had been Bill acting on his office, herself on her bridge group, Barbara on her college mates. The reverse electromagnetic effect. That had been all those weird happenings over television. She stared at her bound and gagged son. If it hadn't been for that postcard, and if she had gone for the book herself instead of sending James, this wouldn't have happened. As it was, the book had turned him into a little monster, her own child, and she had thought that he was becoming such a fine, upstanding young man of late. Had he hypnotized her into thinking that? Probably, just as he had tried to hypnotize her again before. Let her untie his hands, and he'd snap his fingers, and in a moment her eyes would glaze. She shuddered. She couldn't let him loose, but she couldn't leave him there like that either. You can't keep a child bound and gagged for the rest of his or your natural life. You can't do it for more than a few hours. Sooner or later, even if it were only to permit him to eat, she'd have to untie him, and then— She stared down at the book in her hands. How had it got here? Had some irresponsible person in the year 2083 or so read it, just as James had done, and then gone around hypnotizing people at random? Perhaps he had hypnotized someone who could operate a time machine, and the bewildered scientist had sent it backward in time. She caught herself up short. Such speculations to a practical woman like Carrie were silly. The important thing was that here, before her, were 1,000 pages of useful but dangerous information. How dangerous she could only guess. So far James had done little actual harm, but let his resentment be aroused, let him want really to revenge himself on someone, and he'd be the most dangerous human being alive. Her eyes ran down the list of chapters again. They seemed endless. Hypnotism by gesture, hypnotism by mechanical means, hypnotism by autosuggestion, post-hypnotic suggestion, and finally a whole series on erasure. Erasure? That sounded interesting. What were you supposed to erase? There were different subheadings. Erasure of susceptibility, erasure of specific directives, general erasure. She sat down and read with a concentration she had not shown in years. 2 hours later she thought she knew what to do. First she did what the book said was necessary to protect herself. Then she said, "James, look at me." James looked, and she began to erase. An hour later she decided he was safe and untied him. Then she sat down and wrote Barbara a letter. She knew that after Barbara had read it through a few times, the first time in bewilderment, the second and third times with a feeling of obedience, she would follow her mother's instructions perfectly and end by burning the letter, just as she had burned the ones James sent her. Of those most directly affected, that left only Bill. Reardon? He was all right, she thought. James had victimized him after reading no more than the first chapter or two. He hadn't yet read enough then to be really dangerous. But Bill— She had a little talk with her husband directly after supper. It was short, it was simple, it was sweet. When she had ended, Bill remembered nothing, and felt fine. He was fine. There was one more chapter to apply, the one on auto-erasure. That required careful planning, carefully thought-out suggestions. When she had completed all she had ordered herself to do, she threw the book into the furnace and watched it burn, stirring the fragments to make sure that it was completely consumed. All was forgotten. All was fine. Nothing had ever happened. A few weeks later there came a postcard. "Dear Madam," it read, "the book, The Perfect Hostess by Wilhelmina Hoskins, which is charged to your card, is now 2 weeks overdue. Please return it at your earliest convenience. There is a charge of 1 cent for each day overdue." What on earth were they talking about? Carrie wondered vaguely. She hadn't been to the library in months. "James," she called, "did you ever get me a library book called The Perfect Hostess?" "Gosh, no, Mum," said James.
The End. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. Finders Keepers by Stephen Marlowe, writing as Milton Lesser, originally published in Fantastic Universe, June-July 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Eddie Amherst watched the scissors get up from the dresser and march across the room. If they had marched on the floor, it would have been bad enough, but not this bad. They marched across the air of the bedroom, one thin metal leg after the other, to where Eddie was sitting on the edge of the bed in his underwear. They went snip, snip, once, twice, rapidly. Then they marched again across the air of the room and plunked down on the dresser. In his right hand Eddie held a silky piece of black cloth. In his left hand he held a similar item. On the floor at his feet were two other pieces of black cloth. If you glued the sections together, you'd have a pair of black silk socks, size 12. They were so new that you could still see where the paper telling the brand name and the size clung to one of them. But they weren't much good as socks anymore. In his hands Eddie held what could have been a pair of black silk spats, except that no one wore black silk spats. On the floor at his feet were two black silk fingerless gloves. "Hey, George," Eddie called. "George, come here, quick!" George ran in from the bathroom, shaving soap still on one side of his face. He looked at Eddie and the two pieces of black silk in Eddie's hands. He said, "What the hell did you do that for?" "Me? I didn't do anything." "Anyone can see that you went to the dresser, got the scissors, cut your socks in half, then put the scissors back on the dresser. What I want to know is why. Why?" "I didn't," Eddie said lamely. Then he told George how the scissors had got up, marched across the room, and cut his socks. "Yeah," said George, "right away. Take it easy, kid. I know you're about to be married. I know you're nervous. But relax. Just take it easy. Calm down." "Ha," said Eddie. "Ha." "What's so funny?" "I can prove to you that I didn't get up, take the scissors, and cut my socks. I can prove it, that's what." George told him to go ahead. "I just took a shower, right?" "Right." "I always powder my feet after a shower, right?" "How in hell should I know?" Eddie sat back on the bed and stuck his feet out. "Look." There was white powder all over the bottoms of his feet, a lot more of it in between his toes. "Okay," George said. "I see it. What does that prove?" "You go ahead and find the powder on the rug. If I walked from here to the dresser and back, there'd be powder all over the rug where I walked. Find it." George looked, but the rug was solid blue without any white marks on it. "So you crawled on your hands and knees, so you walked on your hands. Just don't tell me the scissors did that themselves. They couldn't." "I didn't say they did it by themselves. Something made them do it. Something doesn't want me to get married, George. Take last night. Someone put pineapple in my fruit cup. You know I'm allergic to pineapple. It makes me itch all over for 2 days, but luckily I found it. When I came back from the florist, the bridge was out. I could have been killed if I hadn't noticed it." George shook his head. "The bridge was not out. I went back and looked for myself later. You went the long way for nothing because the bridge is standing as it always stood. Did you hear anything over the radio about the bridge being out?" "No." "There wasn't even any rain, Eddie boy. You're just nervous. You're imagining things. Judy will have a nervous wreck on her hands if you keep this up. Look, you just sit here and wait for me while I run downtown and get you another pair of black socks." It's Sunday and the stores are closed." "Okay, I'll let you wear mine. I'm only the best man, and I'll wear navy blue, and no one will know the difference." George sat on the edge of the bed next to Eddie and took off his shoes and socks. He gave the socks, just a half size too big, to Eddie, then padded across the room to the chest of drawers to find a pair of navy socks for himself. The scissors got up off the dresser again while George's back was turned, and Eddie wanted to yell, only no sound came out. He just sat there, watching while the scissors cut this new pair of black socks neatly in half. Then George began to turn around, and the scissors dropped quickly at Eddie's feet. George held up a pair of navy socks. "I got 'em," he began. "Eddie, what the hell did you do that again for?" "Honest?" "Never mind, we'll both wear navy." Plainly he thought his cousin Judy was marrying a lunatic. The thing that surprised Eddie most was the fact nothing happened during the first part of the ceremony. It was an outdoor wedding, and he stood with George at the makeshift altar in the garden while Judy came down the aisle with her entourage. Judy was lovely in her get-up, all right, only Eddie could have done without all the pomp and ceremony. And lately there'd been something about Judy, little meannesses, some annoying petulances, which had left Eddie on the irritable side. It was her mother as much as anything, a fat, overbearing, dominating windbag. "Eddie boy, stop talking to yourself that way about your future mother-in-law." "Why should you? Go ahead, keep thinking like that if it's what you feel. Assert yourself." "Who said that?" "Said what?" George wanted to know. "I didn't hear anyone. And be quiet, Eddie. People are looking at you." "You don't have to be quiet unless you really want to. Don't let them rope you into anything, Eddie. It still isn't too late." Eddie looked in vain for the source of the voice, but everyone around him seemed so utterly unperturbed that he could only conclude that he was hearing things. Could this have been the voice of his conscience, telling him to get out while the getting was good? "Conscience, schmonscience. No such thing, Eddie. It's me." "Well, who are you?" George said, "Will you shut up, Eddie? Everyone's staring." After that, it wasn't easy. Judy joined him at the altar, but he listened to the ceremony with only one ear. With the other, he tried to pay attention to the voice which he alone heard. Since it continued, and since he was the only one who heard it, he concluded quite logically that he was going off his rocker. Then maybe he was being roped into something, because if the prospect of marriage to Judy made him feel this way, then maybe he'd better call the whole thing off before it was too late. Or had the strange voice put that idea into his head? Come to think of it, here was a nice, pleasant female voice. It didn't rasp like Mrs. Wilkins's voice, and it didn't hold the slight suggestion of a whine dormant in her daughter Judy's. "Do you, Edward, take this girl Judy to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Silence, except for a few sobs and whimpers in the sea of faces around them. "Do you, Edward?" "Don't do it, Eddie. Do it, and that'll be the end for you. You'll regret it something awful." "You think so, Miss, I'll tell you my name after you refuse. You'll find out a lot of things after." George wailed in Eddie's ear, "For gosh sakes, boy, you're holding up the works, and quit that mumbling to yourself. Just say yes." Said Eddie, cogitating. "And do you, Judy, take this man, Edward?" Apparently his had been taken as an affirmative, if nervous, response. "You're right, Eddie. That's just what happened. Only don't let them go on. In a moment it will be too late, and you'll be stuck." "You think so, eh?" "Shut up!" George hissed in his ear. "To have and to hold through sickness and in health, till—" The wind came up so suddenly, and with it the clouds, that one moment they stood in a bright sunshiny garden, the next it was dark and sombre, and overhead lightning flashed and thunder rolled sullenly. The rain came down in thick sheets from what had been a moment before a wonderfully clear blue sky. Even George's composure received a serious dent. "It just can't happen that fast," he cried. Judy sobbed, "My gown! Oh, my precious gown!" "I said, do you, Judy?" "Don't let him go on, Eddie. The rain will add to the confusion. Tell him you never said yes. You never did, you know." "That's true, I didn't." "Didn't what?" George demanded, as several men ran out to them with umbrellas. "I never said yes," Eddie told him, but the thunder all but drowned him out. "I never said yes!" he fairly screamed. Since everyone had heard him that time, the ceremony had to begin anew. "Do you, Edward?" Better that you don't, Eddie." "Will you please be quiet and let me make up my own mind?" "Eddie!" This was George. "To have and to hold through—" Judy was trying vainly to pull the entire length of her gown under the umbrella, and the fact that she couldn't made her pout. Her makeup was running in the rain too, and quite suddenly she looked rather unpretty. Definitely, positively, irrevocably unpretty. A younger, thinner, somewhat more attractive image of her mother. A thoroughly revolting thought. Said Eddie. "You tell him, Eddie boy." George whispered. "What does that mean? Say yes, so everyone can hear you, especially with this thunder." "That doesn't mean yes," Eddie explained patiently. But then, because the thunder roared still louder, he shouted, "In fact, it means the opposite of yes." "You tell him, Eddie." "It means that this is all a mistake. I will not marry Judy. The answer to the question is no, no, no." No one did anything. They all just stood there, looking at him, and Judy even forgot to see how the rain was ruining her gown. Eddie became embarrassed. They all just stared. Presently he kissed Judy's cheek politely, said he was sorry, turned on his heel, and strode down the muddy aisle. Everyone looked, but no one tried to stop him. The voice said, "You told him, Eddie. You sure told him." He took a hot shower, and it made him feel much better. When he finished and got into a pair of dungarees and a T-shirt and lit a cigarette, the bell rang. It was George. "I ought to punch your nose, Eddie Amherst." "Don't let him talk that way, Eddie." Until now the voice had been silent since the ruined ceremony. "Don't talk to me that way. Just because she was your cousin and just because you introduced us on a blind date." Splat! Something hit Eddie's nose, just as had been predicted, and he sat down on the floor. "He hit you! Get up and knock the stuffing out of him, Eddie." Eddie's nose bled easily. It was bleeding now. He stood up, and George hit him again, and then his nose was bleeding more than ever. This time Eddie sat there and did not try to get up. He knew there were about 9 quarts of blood in his body, and he must have lost at least a quart by now. George readjusted his high hat. He took a step towards the door, but never reached it. A big redwood bookend took off from the end table and thudded against the side of his head. His high hat fell off, and he sat down next to Eddie, muttering something about hitting him from behind. The voice said, "I couldn't bear to let you take a beating. If you can't defend yourself, then I've got to do it for you." For the first time, a concrete thought on all this came to Eddie. Perhaps it was a girl. Just an ordinary girl, only she was invisible. He had seen a movie once, and while the invisible man in it had remained invisible, If you put some clothing on him, you could see his shape. Eddie ran around the room with George's high hat, trying to find an invisible head. But after a time he felt silly. The hat kept falling to the floor every time he tried to put it on something. The voice giggled. "You're wasting your time, Eddie. I'm not invisible, not in the way you mean. Now that you didn't marry that Judy thing, you have no ties, right? No parents? Nope. No close relatives of any type. A bunch of third cousins in Chicago, I think. They don't matter. Any close friends?" Eddie looked down at the floor, where George was trying to get up. "I used to have one," he said. "But not now. Not any longer. Good. Then you can come with me, Eddie. I had to make sure of that first. You ready?" "Where are we going?" "Just have some patience, and you'll see for yourself." "Maybe I won't like it." "He's talking to himself again," George said. "Am I glad my cousin didn't marry him? Lucky Judy." "Ready, Eddie? Ha! A poet, and don't I know it? Eddie began to feel dizzy, but he reasoned that was because George had punched him in the nose not once, but twice. Soon the floor came up to meet him because he no longer could keep his balance, and then, as he sat there, everything began to grow hazy, foggy, unreal. Soon the room was only a shadow of a room, and he could not even tell that the rug was blue. Less than a shadow, it seemed to dissolve in water, in very hot water, because it dissolved quickly. This Eddie did not know, but he dissolved with it. "Edam Hurst, wake up!" Eddie sat up groggily. He was on a big, comfortable couch, and the voice came out of a loudspeaker on the wall. There were the couch and the loudspeaker, a closed door, and Eddie, and outside of that, the room, a small one, was empty. "You got it wrong," Eddie said. "Just a matter of pronouncing. Not Edam Hurst, Ed Amherst. Get the difference?" "Subtle," the voice said. "It doesn't matter. There isn't another Ed Amherst or Ed Amherst here. No confusion." "Well, where's the other voice, the woman?" "Early cultural trait," the voice mused. "High sex identification. Eve did nothing to assert her femininity, yet he knew the voice for a woman's. Interesting, extremely interesting. Of course she's a woman. The timbre isn't that much different for you to know it as a certainty ever. High sex identification in your time, young man. If I simply heard Eve's voice, I'd never know her sex, not just from her voice. Well, she is a woman. Certainly, and a mighty troublesome one. First time something like this has happened in nearly 1,000 years. What do you think we ought to do?" "How the heck should I know? I don't even know what happened." True. I'd forgotten you were no telepath. I wonder if telepathy came in when high sex identification began to wane. No, hardly possible. Ib is obviously a throwback, and she has both. Intriguing." The door opened, and a woman entered the room. She was dressed in shorts and some sort of negligible halter. She walked across the room to the loudspeaker, and Eddie, who had, armed with a tape measure, once judged a local beauty contest, was sure she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She said, "I'd better shut that thing off before Rajuz lulls you to sleep with all his scientific talk." She flicked a switch on the loudspeaker. "Of course, he can still speak through telepathy, but your mind won't get the impulses without that loudspeaker, Eddie, see? I can hear him now, but you can't." Eddie had to take her word for it, because he couldn't hear a thing. He hardly cared. Of paramount importance was this fact. Here was the voice. Not any voice, but the one that had brought him here, wherever here was. Eddie tried to be patient. "You're Ebe," he said. "That much I know. But where the hell are we?"
"You mean in space?"
"Uh-huh."
"We're exactly where your room was. We haven't moved an inch."
"So where's my room? Where is it, then?"
"It isn't. It was. 50,000 years ago it was, Eddie. Not now. Now it's gone, with the building, with the city, with your whole civilization. We've left your time and entered mine."
"Yeah," said Eddie. His voice sounded lame.
"You don't believe me?"
"Nope, sorry, I don't." In truth, Eddie was glad he hadn't married Judy, but as for the rest of this, well, he was from Missouri.
"It's simple. I'm a professor of history, and my period of study was yours, the second millennium of the Christian era."
"Do you, teach history in that outfit?" He pointed to the enticing lines of her halter and shorts.
"Certainly. It's comfortable. Anyway, we use no guesswork in history. We use a time scanner. That, of course, makes history the most accurate of all the sciences. It's mental travel through time, not physical unless you will it. Elementary stuff, Eddie. Just as they learned teleportation through space 10,000 years ago, so they learned you can do the same thing through time. Mental effort, applied properly, can move physical objects. It was always latent in human beings through some unknown ancestor. They just had to learn how to control the power."
Eddie was still skeptical. "So you studied history by actually going back there?"
"Something like that. Then I found you, Ed Amherst."
"Ed Amherst.
What's the difference? I found you, and once I did, purely by chance, of course, that was the end of history. No more studying. They tell me I'm a throwback. Less psi quotient, more sex identification than anyone here. Maybe that explains it. Anyway, I had to bring you back. People constantly teleport trophies through time, but not in 1,000 years has anyone brought back a human being. I saw that you had no ties, and I brought you. Unfortunately, there's a law against it, I think."
Eddie asked her why.
"It can cause a lot of trouble. You can change history by bringing someone where he doesn't belong. But I had to. I'm a throwback. I couldn't be satisfied."
Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she had been walking closer and closer to Eddie ever since she had turned off the loudspeaker. Now, abruptly, she was standing next to him, and then she was sitting on his lap. She snuggled in close, and then she began to kiss him, and Eddie knew at once that kissing had come a long way in 50,000 years, even if the psi quotient was greater and sex identification had diminished. 3 minutes later, Ebe got up, and Eddie knew quite suddenly that while he had always known love at first sight to be ridiculous and impossible, love at first kiss was a very different matter.
"Damn that Rajuz! He's the dean, and he wants us in his office. So it goes, Eddie. If it's not one thing, it's another. We have no choice, of course. We'll have to go."
They left the room and stood on a moving sidewalk with a lot of other people, and this first 5-minute glimpse of the place was enough to convince him that he had indeed been teleported through time. A lot of what he saw could not even register in his brain simply because he had no standards for comparison. But he did notice almost at the outset that everything seemed simplified, possibly because telepathy and teleportation were the reigning king and queen.
"You've seen enough of the city for now," Ebe told him. "All these people are out walking for the exercise. Let's take the shorter way to Rajuz's office."
One moment they stood there on the moving sidewalk. The next they were in the presence of Rajuz. Rajuz sat at what must have been a desk, a spherical desk, but he did not look much like a dean. He could have been a technician, or even a truck driver. Ebe explained, "The trend has been away from differentiation since the text identification patterns were decreased. But I'm fed up with it. They all look the same, like that. You know something, Eddie? I like you better." Rajuz tuned in another of the loudspeakers on his desk, and Ebe explained that it was necessary because the psi quotient varied in everyone. "Ebe Lim, Edam Hurst, you have committed a misdemeanor." "Not him," Ebe said. "It was all my fault." "Motivation is above suspicion here, you know that. It is the law. If someone does something, it is because he wants to. Edam Hurst is as guilty as you are." He scowled at them for a time, and then continued, "Frankly, I don't know what to do. This is the first crime of this nature in 1,000 years, and while it's merely a misdemeanor, it will have to go punished." "Yes," Ebe agreed. "I guess so. You name it and we'll oblige." "You won't like it." "Name it anyway." "The punishment simply is this. You are to take Edam Hurst back where he belongs." "Oh, no! Not after I found him." "That is the punishment. Throwback or no, you must learn that sex identification is decidedly secondary to psi quotient. When can you take him?" "Well, "Don't I have anything to say about this?" Eddie demanded. "A feeble bit at best. Just sit still and listen, young man." "I suppose I can take him this afternoon if the scanner room is vacant." "It will be vacant. We'll see to that. I'm glad you're being sensible about this whole unhappy affair, Iblim." "What are you so cheerful about?" Eddie said. They stood in the scanner room, and the girl was humming a little tune. "Don't worry, Edam Hurst." "Relax, Eddie. I'm cheerful because I know what I'm doing. That's why. Just bear with me." He had no choice. But now that suddenly, devastatingly, he felt about Ebe the way she felt about him, he did not want to lose her. It was as simple as that. "Time is huge," Ebe told him. "You didn't think that once I found you I'd let you go. Oh, no. I found you, and you're mine. That's all there is to it. Even Jiva, Lord of the City, couldn't do a thing about it. No, sir. Time is big, and while I said—" She flicked a switch and kicked nonchalantly at a pedal with her foot. "That ought to do it. Just don't be frightened, Eddie. The important thing—" "The important thing," he finished for her, "is that we want to be together, right?" "Right," she said, kissed him soundly, and turned a little knob on the wall. "Now we're ready." As before, Eddie became dizzy, and soon he was sitting on the floor watching the room spin and fade, spin and fade. By the time it dissolved, Eddie was whirling away into a giddy limbo. He stood up and heard the wild nature sounds all around them. The bulk of the time machine was big at his side in a green wooded glen. Ebe came dancing up to him with an armful of fruit. "Here, it's delicious. Taste it." She held out her hand, and he took a bite, then looked up sharply. With a whirring sound, the machine faded, disappeared. "I sent it back," the girl said. "I wanted to make it permanent, just you and I. Time is big, and they'll never find us. Besides, they'll think this is punishment enough. We're exiled back here." "Well, where is here?" "Oh, I'm not exactly sure. Right around the time the human species emerged. Should be a wonderful life, Eddie." Eddie began to sing a popular song. Popular? It had been popular when? This was all very confusing. "Edam Hurst, you have positively the worst singing voice I've ever heard." He smiled and told her to be quiet, kissing her to put more force behind the command. Then, hand in hand, Edam and Ebe walked through their glen. The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And don't forget to check out the channel. There's hundreds of stories. Hundreds of stories.
The names of those congenital skeptics who insist that time travel is impossible, even in theory, are legion. Nor is their stand difficult to comprehend. They say that no man or woman has yet travelled backward to meet a younger him or herself face to face. They say this is immutable paradox. And by way of clincher, they add a query as to why, if time travel is to come, has it never happened? Why haven't we recorded instances of visitations from the future? However, those in favour of time travel have answers ready and waiting. These optimists use the parallel universe theory to meet the first question. Such return, they claim, would immediately cause a forking of the earthways, leaving our version of the world untrodden by time-travelling feet. As to the clincher, the counter-question with a how do we know we haven't had such visitors? Time travel, when it comes, will come in a far distant future. At such a distance, the mere 6,000 years of recorded human history is a mere fly-speck on the annals of Earth. So why should this tiny dot in the continuum have been favoured?
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. The Incredible Slingshot Bombs by Robert Moore Williams. Originally published in Amazing Stories, May 1942. Narrated by Tom Trussel. "You go over to the other ridge," the sheriff said to the two deputies. "If he tries to get out that way, stop him. But remember, we want him alive, if we can get him that way." I only half heard what the sheriff said. My attention was fully occupied by the dogs down in 10 Mile Valley below us. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them bugling down there in the cedar thickets. Baying slowly and mournfully, they were searching for the lost trail. A creek ran down the middle of the valley. Probably Tommy son of a gun had crossed the creek and thrown the bloodhounds off his trail. Tommy might be a moron, but he had enough animal cunning to lose a pack of hounds that were after him. His name wasn't really Tommy son of a gun. It was Tommy Britton, but the loafers around Brock's Tavern had taught him to say that his name was Tommy son of a gun. They thought this was funny. The sheriff and I watched the two deputies tramp down into 10 Mile Valley, but we lost sight of them before they reached the farther ridge. The steel towers of an electric high line ran along this ridge for a couple of miles, then dipped down and crossed the valley. The transmission line carried current from the big dam about 20 miles to the north. When the war first started, there was some fear that enemy agents might sabotage this high line, and the sheriff had spent most of his time out in the hills guarding it. The sheriff was a big, raw-boned mountaineer by the name of Tim Hoskins. He wore store clothes like they were overalls. He was long and lank, and if you took one look at him, you had the instant impression that he had just enough sense to come in out of the rain, and no more. If you took a second look, and noticed the slow, cautious way he talked, and the slow but damned sure way he moved, and especially if you looked at his eyes, which never faltered from the gaze of any man, you would be likely to decide you were damned glad you lived in a country where they had sheriffs like this. "What do you make of it, Sheriff?" I asked. He was carrying his left arm in a bloody sling. Before he answered, he adjusted the sling so his arm hung a little easier. Then he shook his head. "I don't know, Ben. I just don't know." I'm Ben Hopper, and for the past 4 years I've been owner and publisher of the Summit Press. I'm also editor of this paper, advertising manager, circulation manager, business manager, proofreader, and copy boy. The press is strictly a one-man country paper, but it prints the news, which was why I was out here in the hills. There was news out here. Maybe it was mighty big news, too. I was going to ask some more questions, but the clatter of an overworked motor interrupted me, and I turned in time to see a car banging up the gravel road toward us. It was a grey Ford coupe, and I needed only one glance to recognize it and to know who was driving it. Ellen Briscoe. Uncle Sam sent her out here to try and teach the people on the hill farms how to keep from starving to death. The relief lady, the mountaineers called her. She was coming up the hill road like she didn't know there was any such thing as tire rationing. Steam popped out of the radiator as the car reached us. She was out of it almost before it stopped rolling. "Hello, Ben," she said to me. "Ellen, you've got no business being here," I protested. She ignored me. She had business wherever she wanted to be, which was anywhere anybody was in trouble. "Sheriff, what's this all about?" she demanded. Hoskins scraped a toe against the rocky ground. I don't know for sure, Miss Ellen," he said. "I heard about it in Summit," she said, "and I came right up here. They told me in Summit that you had organized a posse and gone after Tommy. Sheriff, what has Tommy done?" Those were the words she used. The tone of her voice said more than the words. The sheriff wore out a lot of shoe leather before he answered. "Sim Brock swore out a warrant," he said at last. "I don't have any choice about serving it." "Sim Brock swore out a warrant, did he?" Fire flashed from her eyes. "Don't you know those loafers down at the roadhouse Brock runs are always teasing Tommy?" "I know, Miss Ellen," the sheriff said uncomfortably. "Were they teasing him, and did he strike at one of them? Is that why you've got this posse after Tommy?" "They might have been teasing him before it happened, but I don't know that they were. The warrant charged Tommy with blowing up Brock's barn." "Blowing up his barn?" "That was the way Brock swore out the warrant." "And you believed Sim Brock?" Ellen demanded. "Don't you know he's a liar and a no-good scoundrel? Don't you know that nobody can believe anything Brock says?" "Yes," the sheriff slowly said, "but the barn was blown up. I went to look. I didn't put any faith in what Brock said, but the warrant had been sworn out, and I had to act. So I went looking for Tommy." "With a gun in your hand, I suppose," she said sharply. He looked at her then, just glanced up, but his gaze didn't falter. "You know better than that, Miss Ellen," he said. She flushed. Her temper had been running away with her, and she knew it. "I'm sorry," she said. "What happened?" "I didn't have much trouble finding Tommy," the sheriff explained. "He was crossing a field when I spotted him. I stopped my car and walked toward him, and he took a shot at me. Down in this country you may do a little private feuding with your neighbors, but there is one thing you don't do. You don't shoot at the sheriff." "He shot at you?" Ellen gasped. "Where did he get a gun?" "He didn't have a gun." Ellen's face showed confusion. "Then how did he shoot at you?" she demanded. "With that slingshot he always carries," the sheriff said. Tommy's favorite weapon, in fact his only weapon, was a rubber slingshot. A pocket full of pebbles and a sling was all he needed to be happy. "Sheriff," Ellen's voice was hot again, "just because he shot at you with a sling is no reason why you should call out a posse and run him down like a mad dog." "No," the sheriff admitted, "especially since he didn't hit me."
He didn't hit you, and you—"
"He hit my car," the sheriff said.
Ellen's face blazed with anger. "So what? A few more nicks in that rattletrap of yours won't make any difference."
"No, Miss Ellen," the sheriff said, his voice dry and tense. "Not any more."
"Not any more? What are you talking about?"
"Not any car any more," the sheriff said. "It blew up."
"Blew up?"
the girl gasped. "Sky high," the sheriff said. "Chunks of the motor landed a quarter of a mile away. Piece of hot metal hit me." He looked down at the bloody sling holding his arm. "That's where I got this." I'd already seen what was left of his car, which was mostly a hole in the ground. A case of dynamite wouldn't have blown it into smaller pieces. "I've got 2 reasons for wanting to catch Tommy," the sheriff continued. "First, I got a warrant that says I must arrest him. Second, I want to look at those pebbles he's shooting out of that slingshot." You can damn well bet he wanted to look at those pebbles. So did I. If a pebble small enough to be shot out of a sling could blow up a car, it was a mighty powerful and mighty important chunk of rock. Think how big an explosion a pebble as big as a baseball would make. Think how many baseballs could be carried in a bomber. What was Tommy son of a gun shooting in his sling?
"I just can't believe it," Ellen said when she had recovered from her surprise. "Tommy didn't cause those explosions. Your car just happened to blow up at that moment. Tommy didn't do it. He couldn't have done it. It's impossible."
The sheriff didn't argue with her, and neither did I. We were both watching what was happening down in 10 Mile Valley. Those bloodhounds, after being baffled for a long time, had suddenly hit a hot trail. Then Tommy appeared. He dashed across the glade in the cedar thickets, running half bent over like some ungainly animal. He was so far away he was just a little black dot, but I saw him look back over his shoulder at the dogs. They were right behind him. I heard them break into an excited bugling as they saw their prey and started running by sight instead of by scent. Tommy frantically ran into the cedars. The dogs raced across the glade after him. There were 4 of them, running in a bunch, and giving tongue as they ran. They vanished in a puff of white light. It happened almost too fast for the mind to grasp it. 1 second, 4 bloodhounds were running across the glade. The next second there was an intense puff of light. The 3rd second the whole glade seemed to take wings and fly up into the air. The 4th second, boom! The sound of the explosion reached us. A ball of smoke leaped upward, and the cedar trees bent over in a blast of air. In the silence that followed came the faint clatter of stones falling back to the ground. There wasn't another bark from those dogs. There weren't any dogs left to do any barking. The sheriff's face turned a pasty grey. I believe from the bottom of my heart that he is scared of nothing, that he doesn't know the meaning of fear, but when that explosion came, his face turned grey. He glanced once at Ellen, as if he was asking her if this confirmed the wisdom of his decision to send a posse after Tommy son of a gun. So far as I was concerned, it did. Then he started walking away. "Where are we going?" I called after him. "Down there," he said, nodding towards the glade where the explosion had taken place. "I reckon maybe I better get Tommy if I can." Ellen and I stayed on top of the ridge and watched. Ellen hadn't spoken a word since the explosion, but from the way she was holding on to my arm, I knew how scared she was. I could feel her tremble. The sheriff vanished among the cedars down below, but I knew he was down there somewhere, stalking Tommy son of a gun. I also knew that other deputies were moving up from below, while still another group had probably cut across the valley up above. A grim trap was closing. "What can it possibly mean?"
Ellen whispered. "It means you had better go home," I answered. She wouldn't go. She was a relief lady, and Tommy was somebody who might need help. It was already late in the afternoon. We stayed there on top of the ridge while darkness fell, and waited for anything. I shivered every time I thought of the explosion that had killed those 4 dogs. A hand grenade would not have caused so much destruction. There wasn't any chance of coincidence either. Those dogs had been after Tommy, and he had destroyed them. "Ben," said Ellen suddenly, "we've got to find Tommy." "Huh?" Even the idea startled me. "We've got to find him before the posse does. Those men are scared, and they won't take any chances with him. Even the sheriff is scared. If they find Tommy and he tries to run, and that's what he will try to do, they'll shoot him. Ben, we've got to find him first, to save his life." It took some time for this to sink in, and when it did sink in, I didn't like it. I tried to laugh it off. A fine chance we have of finding him when this posse can't. "I can find him. I know where he is." "What?" "He has a cave about a mile from here. Every time he gets in trouble, he runs there and hides. That's where he was going when those dogs almost caught him, to his cave. If we go there, we're almost certain to find him." "And get ourselves blown into mincemeat like those dogs?" I protested. "He won't do anything to me. He knows me. I'm his friend." "Nuts, baby. We're not going." "All right," she said defiantly. "I'll go alone." She started walking away. "All right," I groaned. "I'll go with you. But you're taking an unfair advantage of me, and I know it." The cave was in a ravine that led off from 10 Mile Valley. By the time we reached the place, the moon was up, but there wasn't much light down in the bottom of the ravine. Clumps of cedars grew everywhere, making dark blotches behind which anything might be lurking. A darker blotch was the mouth of the cave. "Tommy!" Ellen called. There was no answer. I stood there in the darkness and wished to hell I was back in my office setting this story in type. Ellen was clinging to me so hard she was about to pull my arm off. A shadow seemed to move in the mouth of the cave. "Tommy," Ellen said quickly, "don't be afraid. We've brought you some candy, Tommy. Don't you want some candy?" Silence. A wind went whispering through the cedars, setting my teeth to chattering. "We have some candy, Tommy." There was a tiny creak, as of somebody shifting his weight. It came from the cave. I did not in the least doubt but that Tommy son of a gun was standing there looking out at us, slingshot in hand, trying to make up his poor mind if we were after him. At this moment my memory chose to remind me of what had happened to those bloodhounds. They had been after him too. Anything that was after him he would shoot at. Cold sweat was dripping from under my arms and running down my body. "Why don't you come down and get the candy we brought you?" Ellen asked. "Scared," a dull, choked voice said from the mouth of the cave. Tommy was there all right. He was watching us. He wanted candy, but he was scared. He wasn't a tenth as scared as I was. Dillinger with a pistol would not have been near as dangerous as this half-man who lurked in the cave mouth. You could talk to Dillinger. He wouldn't shoot without a reason. You could talk to Tommy, but he wouldn't understand. "You needn't be scared," Ellen said. "We won't hurt you. Don't you remember all the candy I've brought you? Don't you remember that new pair of overalls I brought you last month? Weren't they fine overalls, Tommy?" "Uh-huh, nice. Wearing 'em now." He didn't sound quite so hostile. "Come and get the candy," Ellen said, opening her purse.
It took her 5 minutes to get him down out of that cave. Those were 5 minutes of hell for me. Ellen's voice showed no trace of concern, no fear, no worry. Listening to her, you would have thought she hadn't a care in the world. Only the way she was holding on to my arm showed me how scared she was. "Here," she said, handing him a candy bar. He ate it, paper cover, tin foil, and all. He didn't look at me. He saw me all right, but he didn't trust me, so he didn't glance in my direction. "How did you make the big noises?" Ellen quietly asked. "Her big noises?" He sounded scared again. I took a firm grip on a lungful of air and prepared to hold on to it. "The big booms," Ellen said. "You know, like firecrackers, only lots louder. They sure were fine noises." "You like 'em, huh? Want hear more big noises, huh? 4th of July noises, huh?" My eyes had become accustomed to the darkness, and I saw him lift his arms and stretch his slingshot rubbers. "Want more noises, huh?" he asked proudly. "Not now, Tommy," Ellen said quickly, a sudden catch in her voice. "Let me see one of the firecrackers that make the big noises." "Huh?" He lowered his arms, but he held the sling ready. His grunt was full of suspicion. "I'll give you another candy bar for one of your firecrackers," Ellen said quickly. She opened her purse, and I heard the rattle of waxed paper. "I'll trade you a candy bar for a firecracker. You want another candy bar, don't you, Tommy? Remember how good that last candy bar was?" He remembered all right. His eyes never left the bar of chocolate she was holding toward him. I went right on holding my breath. "Okay," he said suddenly. "Trade." He took something out of the pocket of his sling, dropped it in Ellen's hand, grabbed the candy bar, and started eating. "Flashlight," Ellen whispered to me. To Tommy she said, "We're going to turn on a flashlight so we can look at the firecracker. It's a good candy bar, isn't it, Tommy?" My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the light. Ellen was holding the firecracker in the palm of her hand. I took one look at it, and I didn't believe my eyes. It was about the size of a big pea. It wasn't as big as a grape. It looked like a small round pebble. This was the bomb that had caused those terrific explosions. "Is this what made the big noises?" Ellen asked. "Sure," Tommy said, stopping eating long enough to talk. "Make big boom. Want more? Got plenty." He reached into a pocket of his overalls and brought out a handful. "Good shootin' rocks," he said. I just didn't believe it. There are mental limits beyond which the mind refuses to function. It was impossible to think that such a tiny pellet could cause so much destruction. I took Tommy's sling, put the pellet in the pocket, stretched the rubbers as far as they would go, and released them. I had to see with my own eyes. I had to know. I had to be sure. I damned well found out. Although the explosion took place at least 75 yards away, it blew me off my feet. A great bulge of flame leaped into the sky, and the heavens roared with the thunder of the sound. Tommy jumped up and down in excitement. "Big noise, goody, goody, want more booms?" No, I stuttered, picking myself up from the ground. "Ben, you idiot," Ellen snapped. "The sheriff will hear that." "No, Tommy, no more booms right now. Where did you get those firecrackers, Tommy? Where did you get them?" Firecrackers, hell! Those things were the mightiest explosive bombs for their weight ever used on Earth. In violence, they backed TNT right off the map. Nitroglycerin was not a tenth as powerful. If a pellet that weighed a fraction of an ounce could cause such an explosion, How big an explosion would 100-pound bomb make? One bomber could sneak in out of the clouds and smash a city. One bomb would do the job. Where had Tommy son of a gun gotten those round pebbles that exploded with such violence? "Candy," he said questioningly. "More candy." "I'll give you a barrel of candy if you will show us where you got these things," I said. I was scared sick. I was remembering Pearl Harbor, the Prince of Wales, and the Repulse. Had bombs such as these sent those 2 gallant ships to the bottom? If this had happened, how had similar bombs gotten here to the heart of America? Where were these round pebbles coming from? Obviously, Tommy had found them somewhere, but where? Who had made them? "A barrel of candy," Tommy gasped. "Gosh!" Grabbing his slingshot from the ground where I had dropped it, he started off, motioning us to follow him. Stumbling, following him as best we could, he led us straight to one of the transmission line towers. "It was attempted sabotage," I gasped. "Somebody tried to blow up the high line, but the bombs didn't explode. Tommy found their explosives." This was a reasonable guess. If one of these big steel towers went down, a lot of defense industries that were dependent upon the juice flowing through the cables overhead would have to shut down. "Got 'em right here," Tommy said. He shambled toward the legs of the tower, which formed an arch overhead. He was holding one of Ellen's hands, and I was holding the other. We were strung out in a line. I could hear current singing in the transmission line as he went under the arch formed by the legs of the tower. It was a high, thin, wailing sound, and it meant that juice was leaking somewhere. He stepped through the arch and vanished. Ellen, following a step behind him, vanished. I took another step, which brought me under the arch, and the tower vanished. 1 second it was there over my head, the steel lattice climbing skyward. The next second, no tower, no sky, no stars, no moon, no hillside, no high line, no night. My tongue took a running jump and dived down into my throat to hide. What the hell?" I heard my own voice say. I was in what looked like a big building. On one side was a lot of hooded machinery that was clicking softly to itself. I had the fleeting impression that this machinery was largely automatic in operation, that raw materials were being fed in from some source overhead, and finished articles were rolling out into a large hopper. A soft blue light came from the walls of the building, which seemed to be windowless. Ellen was standing right in front of me. The only movement about her was a flutter of her eyelids. She seemed to be frozen stiff. I was pretty well frozen myself. What the devil had happened to us? Where were we? Mad thoughts were bouncing up and down inside my brain. I had the impression I had gone insane. Tommy wasn't scared. He didn't seem to mind what had happened. Something that would scare a man with sense to the verge of hysterics had no effect on him. He understood almost nothing about the world in which he lived, and consequently anything was possible to him. There are times when being a moron has its advantages. This was one of those times. This building did not astonish Tommy, nor was he perturbed about the miraculous way in which we had entered it. He ran over to the hopper in front of the big machine, thrust both hands into it, and came running back to us, his hands held out in front of him. "Firecrackers!" he said exultantly. He had a double handful of the round explosive pellets. The machine was manufacturing them. They were being made right here in this windowless building, in 10 Mile Valley. This was where Tommy had got those incredible bombs. Somehow he had stumbled into this hidden place.
He looked expectantly up at me. "Gimme barrel of candy," he said hopefully. My tongue was still hiding down in my throat, as if it was determined to have no part in the lies it knew I was going to tell. Sure," I stuttered. "I'll get the candy for you as soon as we get back to town. But, Tommy, where are we?" That was the question. Where were we? "Huh?" said Tommy. Then he added, in explanation, "We're here." Hell, I knew that. What I wanted to know was where here was. I tried another tack. "Where did this building, all these machines, where did they come from?" He shrugged. The question was over his head. "Find 'em here," he said. He looked hopefully at me. "Candy for Tommy son of a gun?" His little mind ran on one track. The building was here. The machines were here. Facts to be accepted without question, just like the hills and the rain. He had found them here. That was all he knew about them. "Let's get out of this place," I said to Ellen. There was a dazed, glazed expression in her eyes. Her mind had refused to accept the evidence of her eyes, and she had stopped thinking. In my mind was pure panic. Never in my life had I wanted to run so badly. The only thing that interested me was to get out of this place fast. I was starting to do just that when a voice stopped me. "Here's that thief again," the voice said. At least that was what I thought it said. The words were English, but they weren't like the English I know. The accent was all wrong, and they were run together in a sing-songy effect. I turned to see who had spoken. 2 men were standing in a door at the far end of the building. Apparently they had just entered. Dressed in glittering clothes, stern-faced, they didn't look like any people I wanted to meet. I grabbed Ellen and started to run. "Halt!" the command came. I wasn't doing any halting. I was out of my mind from sheer fright. My sole interest lay in getting out of that place. I was so confused I didn't realize I didn't know how to get out, and I did the only thing possible, which was to turn and run. As it worked out, this was exactly the right thing to do. A split second after I started to run, the building vanished. I was back at the Highline Tower, not under it, but beside it, with the night and the stars and the moon around me, and the high-pitched whine of leaking current in my ears. I was back where I had started from, and no building full of automatic machinery was in sight. What's the matter?" Tommy gibbered beside me. He sensed how scared I was, and this scared him. Ellen had quietly fainted. I threw her over my shoulder. "Run!" I shouted at Tommy. With him at my heels, I started making tracks away from there. "Halt!" came a high-pitched command from behind me. A streak of light drove through the night, passed within a foot of my head. It seemed to set the darkness on fire. The 2 men had taken a shot at us. This was all Tommy needed to convince him that something was really after him. He was already scared, and when that streak of light went past us, he went crazy. Crouching and turning, he stretched the rubbers of that slingshot. "Don't shoot!" I screamed at him. It was too late. The rubbers blurred as he released the sling. Looking back, I caught a glimpse of the 2 men. It was the same 2 men, all right. They were standing beside the tower, looking completely bewildered. They were making no effort to stop us. Then that pellet hit them. Bluey! The blast hurled me forward, but I managed to keep my feet and keep running. Fire spouted skyward. There was a crack of breaking steel. The tower was falling. The explosion had knocked the legs out from under it, and it was falling. Somewhere over my head was a thrumming snap. I knew what it meant. The copper Highline cables, strained by the falling tower, were about to break. There were 66,000 volts of electricity in those twanging cables. With Ellen in my arms, I dived into a ravine. As I hit and rolled, the night was cataclysmic with bursting flame. Arcs like bright flashes of lightning leaped against the sky as the cables parted. The live ends hit the ground and writhed like giant snakes, spewing 15-feet-long streams of molten fire. There was juice in those cables, plenty of juice, and it was running wild. Somewhere, somebody screamed. Tommy! He was screaming! As if his scream was a signal, the whole earth seemed to gather itself together and hunch upward in one violent explosive blast. It knocked me cold. As I blacked out, I saw a great spout of flame leaping toward the stars, and I remember thinking that the whole vault of heaven was on fire. Then something seemed to hit me on the head, and I quit thinking. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital, and a nurse was bending over me. As soon as I opened my eyes, she went dashing out of the room, to return with a doctor. He poked and pried at me, and finally said that he thought I would live. From the way I felt, this was more than I expected. The doctor had no more than left until there was a violent argument at the door. The nurse was telling someone that I couldn't have company, and somebody else was saying I was going to have company or else. Then Ellen was bending over me. "Ben, are you badly hurt?" I told her what the doctor had said, and the relief that flooded her face almost made me feel romantic. She had a big patch of adhesive tape on her face and a lot of scratches and bruises, but she was able to walk. "Ben, what happened?" she asked. "Those two men, that building, those machines." "And those atomic bombs," I said. "What? Atomic bombs? I don't understand. What were those men doing, Ben?" "Sabotage," I said firmly. "But it couldn't have been sabotage," she protested. "If they had wanted to blow up the High Line, they could have done it without any trouble. And that building and the High Line tower existed in the same place, Ben. It couldn't have been attempted sabotage. There must be some other explanation. I've thought, and I don't see the answer." "Just the same, it was sabotage," I said. "That's the way I am going to write the story." "You will be lying, Ben," said a voice from the doorway. I looked up. It was the sheriff. He came walking into the room. His arm was still in a sling, and his face looked greyer than ever. "How did you get here?" I stuttered. "I found you and brought you in," he said. "The two of you." He pulled up a chair and sat down in a manner that indicated he planned to stay a while. "Now tell me the truth, you two," he said. "Tell me just exactly what happened, the way it happened." "You will call us liars," I protested. "That may be," he admitted, "but I want to hear it just the same." So we told him. He sat there and listened without a sign of expression on his face. For all the emotion he showed, he might have been made out of wood. "What do you make of it, Ben?" he said at last, when we had finished. "Sabotage," I said. "What do you really think, Ben?" he came back. "Well," I said slowly, "there was a slight leakage of current down that particular tower. I think this leakage and the particular way in which it took place accidentally combined to make us the first time-travellers in human history." Ellen gasped at that, but the sheriff didn't blink an eye. "Go on," he said. "I think that building exists in the future," I said. "I think it will exist some day, and that it exists now, and if we could cross time, we could see it. Those men spoke a strange kind of English. That points to the future. They were making atomic bombs. We don't know how to make atomic bombs now, but we will know how to do it in the future. I think that building we entered was an arsenal of the future that will be built in 10 Mile Valley in some coming century. You asked me what I think, and I've told you, I defiantly finished. If you don't like it, you can think up your own explanation. He didn't budge. Tommy, he said, his voice a question. Tommy accidentally blundered through the arch made by the legs of the tower. He found a machine making tiny atomic bombs. He didn't know they were bombs. He thought they were fine pebbles to shoot in his slingshot, and that's what he used them for. They exploded on contact. Maybe they were designed to be dropped from an airplane hundreds at a time. Maybe they were to be used in interplanetary war. I don't know why they were being made. All I know is that an idiot found them and thought they would be fine things to shoot in a sling. Incidentally, what happened to Tommy? I had forgotten all about Tommy son of a gun. We found pieces of him, the sheriff sighed. He had a pocketful of those pebbles when the falling cables hit him. They all exploded at once. Poor Tommy son of a gun. He would never get his barrel of candy. Decisively, the sheriff got to his feet. He stopped at the door and looked back. You are right, Ben, he said. It was attempted sabotage. And that's the way it went down in the official records. That's the way I wrote the story for my paper. The public would be willing to believe in sabotage, but would they be willing to believe in time travel? Not this century.
The end. To help save more of the forgotten stories of futures past, visit storiesoffuturespast.substack.com/about.